Hi, and welcome to Sheep Farm, and this is our first podcast interview. Today we'll be interviewing licensed psychotherapist Jerry Marzinsky from the US. When me and our Chris first watched Jerry in a podcast, his information really resonated and joined up a heck of a lot of dots, especially to the Monsters Inc. theory we talk about. What he speaks about answers so many questions on a spiritual level, and is maybe some of the essence of human existence. It certainly answers a lot of questions about how our leaders are currently operating and behaving. In his book, written with Sherry Sweeney, called An Amazing Journey into the Psychotic Mind, Breaking the Spell of the Ivory Tower, this book is a must-read for anybody interested in this subject. In the interview, Jerry talks about his experiences working with the mentally ill, specifically schizophrenics and the voices that they hear. In the first hour, we discuss the background of psychiatry, from drugs to treatment, and then in the second hour, Jerry talks about some of the patient experiences he's had, and we get into the voices that are classed as hallucinations by mainstream psychiatry, but are really something else entirely. We also discuss the shadow people. He talks about the Bible and religion. Now, we aren't religious, but again, some of what he says resonates on a spiritual and conscious level. What Jerry is about to tell us in this podcast is unnerving. Here's Jerry's bio before we get into the podcast. Jerry has been a licensed psychotherapist and has over 35 years of experience working with schizophrenics and other psychiatric patients in state hospitals, state prisons, mental health centres and hospital emergency rooms in the US. Jerry's formal academic training comprises of a BA in psychology from Temple University, a master's degree in rehabilitation counselling from the University of Georgia, and 2 years of study in a PhD psychology program. He was awarded the State of Arizona's Meritorious Service Award and the Pima College Apple Award as an instructor in abnormal psychology. He is also a commercial airline pilot, a long-distance motorcycle rider and a certified scuba diver. He's got many strings to his bow, and he served as a second lieutenant in the Arizona Civil Air Patrol for 23 years. In this interview, Jerry will reveal what he learned about schizophrenic voices after 30 years of working with schizophrenic patients. Flying in the face of the psychiatric mafia, as he calls it, it turns out that these voices are not hallucinations. In fact, they run well-defined, repeatable patterns, which flies in the face of psychiatry's proclamation that they are hallucinations. It is these voices which drive paranoid schizophrenia. If the voices can be gotten rid of by any means, all symptoms of paranoid schizophrenia vanish with them. As I said, Jerry and Sherry's new book, An Amazing Journey into the Psychotic Mind, Breaking the Spell of the Ivory Tower, is a must-read, and it's available on Amazon. You can visit Jerry's website at jerrymarzinsky.com, spelled JerryMarzinsky. So please sit back and enjoy this interview with Jerry Marzinsky, psychotherapist. All right, welcome to Sheep Farm, and this is a change to our normal presentations. Today, we have a very special guest all the way from Tucson, Arizona. We feel the information that Jerry has fits in with the current climate of possessed or controlled behaviour that's taken, or seems to have taken, all over the entire world. The subject we're going to discuss is fascinating to me and Chris on a personal level, and we're interested in discovering more about it for a variety of different reasons. And I think what Jerry is about to discuss will intrigue, shock, and maybe frighten you all at the same time. I know it did us when we first heard some of those podcasts that he did. In fact, when we first listened to Jerry, we went through all of those sensations. However, what he said also put missing pieces of life's jigsaw into place. And what he has to say could be one of the most important things you could ever hear. And as I mentioned in the earlier intro, Jerry is a licensed psychotherapist with over 35 years working with schizophrenics and other psychiatric patients in state hospitals, state prisons, mental health centres and hospital emergency rooms. And his book, called An Amazing Journey into the Psychotic Mind, Breaking the Spell of the Ivory Tower by Jerry and Sherry Swiney. Have I got that right, Jerry?
Yeah, Sherry Sweeney. She hates
Sherry
to be called
Sweeney.
Swiney.
Right. That's all right. It's Sweeney before she starts sending me letters.
Yeah, she catches you calling her Swiney, she'll go off on you.
And it's a must read. I mean, me and Christian's read it and we couldn't put it down. I'm on my probably starting my second way through it. In this first part, I mean, we haven't even started and we're already discussing about other podcasts. We're going to sort of talk about Jerry's experience in the role he's had and listen to the experience he's had with some of the patients he's seen. In fact, all we want to do is sit back and listen as much as possible because we're that interested. So we'd like to give a very Yorkshire welcome to the first Sheep Farm podcast, Jerry Marzinsky. Hi, Jerry.
Well, glad to be at the sheep farm.
Yeah. It's a very apt name, isn't it? Me and my brother were brought up on a sheep farm, and we think we're all sheep now being farmed. And I think when people listen to what you've got to say, they'll realise that it might not be from the people who think it is.
Well, that's true.
Yeah. So let's start at the beginning then. You said you want to go on the sort of like talk about the history. So what got you interested in the issues of the mind?
Well, coming through college, I didn't know what I was going to do, where I was going to go. And when I hit my first psychology course, it was like, oh, wow, this interests me more than anything else they were trying to teach me. And then when I hit abnormal psychology, I was just like, wow, what is going wrong with these people? And all they had was descriptions. They didn't have any cures. They didn't have any, this is the cause kind of thing. What they had was, it is suspected that, or, preliminary studies say that, there wasn't any spiritual anything to it. So, to regress a little bit, I was raised not to trust authority.
Yeah.
that was hammered into my head as a young child. So here I am. I got into Temple University in Philadelphia, big, 32,000 people there, and I thought I could trust professors. They were supposed to be like the top of the line, and here in some of the psychology classes, here they're saying stuff that made no sense to me. Let me see if I can remember an example. One that stuck in my head was one psychologist. Now we'll talk about psychologists for 1 second here. Yeah. 90% of what they write is not reproducible. In short, it's bullshit.
Right.
And when I was in the PhD program for 2 years, I saw it for myself. It was very clear. You just write anything, get it published. It's publish or perish. And they just wrote any kind of crap that would be published, and they'd publish it. Professors, they either publish or they perish, and they publish all kinds of junk. And then there was one research organization that went back and did a canvassing of whether these psych papers and reports and research were reproducible. Would it happen again if they did it under the same circumstances? And they didn't. It didn't happen. So what they're saying was 90% of what they published was pure BS. Now, I didn't know that at the time. I was still trying to figure that out for myself. The first time it hit me was when I was sitting in class. We were assigned a research paper to read by the psych professor. And I read it, and basically what it was saying was that if two psychotic patients met each other, let me put this down so I can use my hands a little bit, met each other, and they both had the same delusion. So if they met each other and they both said they were George Washington, one of them would have to change his delusion to something else. And I'm sitting there, as a freshman, and I'm going, why the hell would that have to happen? They're both nuts. Why would that happen? And here's this guy saying, oh yeah, it would happen. I had to wrote it in a research article in a journal, and I'm like, well, that doesn't make any sense.
Have they actually tried it, Jared?
Huh?
Have they actually tried it? Have they tried it in any form? Have they tried that?
I'm telling you, it was. Let me see, 4, 5, 6. It was probably 8 years or 9 years later when I got a job at the biggest psychiatric hospital on the planet. This was in Milledgeville, Georgia. There were probably 13,000 patients there at the time I got there. Every mental illness known to man was somewhere there. And I was like a kid in a candy shop. It's like, look at all this stuff, man. What is going on? Trying to figure it out. So here I am doing my rounds. Okay. I'm just going to advance 8 years right now. And I'm doing my rounds on a big psychiatric unit on the second floor. And I see this one fella who's walking around talking to himself, and he was new. So my job was to figure out, who these guys were, what we could expect out of them, how dangerous they were, if we could send them to any kind of rehab program, or whether they were workable at all. So I was keeping track of all the new people coming onto that unit for those reasons. And I kind of crept up behind this guy, and I'm listening to him. And what they taught us in school were that the voices were hallucinations. And I had the impression that they were kind of like random noises or words, or they didn't make any sense. But this guy was speaking like he was, what I was hearing was one side of a telephone conversation. So, he would go quiet, and then he would respond, well, you son of a bitch, you get good, and he'd start yelling at something, and then he'd shut up again, and he'd be like listening, and I'm watching this, and I'm like, God, he looks like he's talking to somebody on the telephone, and he was talking in complete sentences. He wasn't like word salad or anything. He was speaking to whatever he was speaking to in complete sentences. He was upset with whatever or whoever he was talking to. And then he caught me listening in on him, and he turns around and I said, "Hi, I'm Jerry. I'm the psych for this unit." I said, "What's your name?" And he goes, "I'm Jesus Christ." And I go, "Oh." And I look at him and I said, No, I'm Jesus Christ." And I sit there and I waited for him to respond to see if what this professor said was true.
Yeah.
So I'm waiting on pins and needles, just watching him, and he kind of looks and he thinks and he looks around and he looks at me and he goes, "Oh, okay, we can both be Jesus Christ." And he strums off, and I'm like, "Okay, all right, one strike." What other bullshit did they teach me there? What other crap did they put in my head?
Your parents were right. Don't trust authority.
Oh.
So what can you give us a rundown on the normal process when a patient comes in or they're admitted to a mental institute? What happens? Does it depend on their illness, or are they straight away given drugs to?
Well, it depends on which mental institution they are admitted to. If they're admitted to a state hospital, chances are they're going to get, anybody who's admitted to any kind of psych unit is going to get some kind of drug, because that's what psychiatrists do.
Right.
They don't talk to people for any length of time. In the prison, they did not want to give out psych drugs because they were expensive. So you have these criminally insane characters that, I remember one incident in the prison I was working at, where this one psychotic inmate was getting more and more paranoid, and I was tracking him, and I'd contact with him every once in a while, and he'd get more and more paranoid that this other inmate was doing things to him and was going to hurt him or kill him. Right. And he was threatening to kill this guy first. So I'd bubble him down. I'd send him over to the medical unit where the psychiatrist was, write notes about, okay, this guy's psychotic. He's hearing voices telling him to harm this other inmate. He's losing more and more control. Something needs to be done with him. In other words, give him some medicine, otherwise he's going to hurt somebody. Yeah. They sent him back. The chief psychologist sent one of his stooges over there to intercept any inmate that we were sending over there to be medicated, because we thought they were dangerous, because it was costing too much money, and he looked bad if he spent too much money. So he was put another stooge psychologist over there to head these people off, diagnose them something else,
Right.
and send them back. So that's what he did. So a couple of days later, this guy's getting worse. I sent him back over to the psych hospital again in the prison, wrote another couple of pages of this guy's dangerous. You need to do something about him. He's starting to lose it. He's hearing voices telling him to hurt this other guy. He's threatening this other guy. You need to do something with him. The stooge sent him back again saying, oh, he's a personality disorder. He's not psychotic. So these guys are formal psychologists. And supposedly they're the only ones that can diagnose anybody with their bullcrap DSM, which is all a work of fiction. Every single one of those diagnoses is made up. There is not one clinical test to verify any of them, not even one of them. Not one. No lab test, no EKG, no EEG, no kind of test to verify any one of the 300 or so diagnoses that these psychiatrists have get together and voted on to be some kind of psych disorder. None. So they sent this guy back again. He's threatening this guy. I sent him right back again. I put another couple of pages in there. They sent him back again. And he stabbed another inmate 13 times. And I was so furious that I couldn't go to work because I was afraid I was going to beat the shit out of the chief psychologist. I was afraid if I went into work, I would actually assault the asshole.
Yeah.
So,
and do these people care? The psychologists, do they show any sort of remorse or on the mistakes that they make, or just move on to the next one? Because it sounds like from. I'm sorry.
They were just doing what they were ordered to do.
Yeah.
So this was at the state prison. Okay, so that's different.
Right.
They don't. The inmates will not be given medication in the state prison unless they're causing problems, and that's how it is in state hospitals too. These medicines are not used to cure anything. They're not. Basically, what they do is they stun the inmate, especially the antipsychotics. They stun the patient's brain and just put them into a chemical lobotomy.
Right.
And at the same time, they're doing a lot of damage. So the guy's like whizzed out. He's like, I can't think, I can't feel, and the voices have kind of decreased a little bit. What's interesting is these medications, for the most part, 98% of the time, do not get rid of the voices. They only suppress them a little bit, and the voices are still there. So back to your question about what do they do in these different institutions. In the prisons, they won't give them psych drugs unless they absolutely have to or they're causing problems. Same thing in the psych hospitals. They give them these drugs to control them and to keep them out of trouble. Before they had these drugs, they had to fight these people, wrestle them, and it was like a battle royale. They were getting hurt. The patients were getting hurt. People were coming out of it with black eyes and broken bones, wrestling these people down and stuffing them into a straitjacket until they were so worn out they couldn't fight anymore. Giving them all kinds of, before these psych drugs came along, they would do stuff like they would give them emetics to make them sick, to make them throw up. Because after they got sick and they threw up, they didn't feel like causing any problems. So they were looking for ways to control them. They give them emetics. They found out by accident. One guy in one of the labs in Europe had a feces slinging monkey that he would throw crap out of his cage at anybody that came by. So what he did is he got it's kind of like a pick, and he scrambled the prefrontal lobe of this monkey, and the thing became passive. It's like it didn't do anything to bother anybody. Half its brain was gone, and he goes, "Oh man, look at this! This works." So they started doing it on psych patients. That matter of fact, in the U.S., they had something called a lobotomy mobile that we talk about in the book. This guy traveled around, and he would just scramble people's prefrontal cortexes, turning them into zombies instantly.
How many people got done that way? Do you know? Is there a number in the U.S.? Is it tens? Is it thousands?
It's in my book. Somewhere under the lobotomy section. It was thousands, many thousands.
Yeah. And you
could say that. I met one of these at the state hospital once who had a lobotomy, and I remember my initial impression after talking to him. It was like, this guy just isn't quite human.
Yeah.
There was something, he wasn't quite human anymore.
Right.
I could feel that in my gut.
Right.
He didn't react normally. He didn't speak normally. He didn't cause any problems.
One thing to mention, Jared, we haven't actually mentioned that your belief system that the voices aren't part of the illness; they're another entity. We haven't mentioned that yet.
No, we're going to go into that further down, Chris.
Well, we'll go into that.
We'll get into that. Yeah, we don't want to. We don't want to get them too. We want to tease them first.
So you asked the question about what do they do in different settings. So in the state prison, they will give out antipsychotics and other drugs to prisoners who cause problems. The rest won't get anything.
Right.
Matter of fact, some of the prisoners will try to get these drugs from the ones who get them.
Right.
Just to whiz themselves out so they don't have to face things. Now, in the state hospital, it was pretty much the same. Those drugs are used for control.
Right.
They're not used to cure anything. They're used to suppress symptoms and control these people.
So they're a mental straitjacket. Mental straitjacket.
They're a chemical straitjacket. That's
Yeah.
exactly what that is. So instead of fighting the patients into a straitjacket and risking injury, they give them these drugs and it just knocks them out, whizzes them out, and they wander around half semi-conscious. So
you have to wonder at the moment with the decisions that people are making. I mean, they're in a similar state. A lot of people, aren't they? They're walking around with the face coverings on and things like that, not understanding what's really going on, if you like. And
no, and they don't tell them the side effects of these drugs. The side effects are absolutely horrible, and these people don't want to stay on these drugs. They keep quitting them.
Right.
And so in the private psych hospitals, what they'll do is bring these people in. They'll put them on some kind of drug. They might get a little bit of counseling. They'll play them out until their insurance is expired or their state funding is expired, and then they'll release them with 2 weeks of these drugs to take, and tell them, okay, if in the prison they release them with 2 weeks, and these are like psychotic killers and psychopaths. They give them 2 weeks worth of drugs, and they say, okay, when you run out, go to the nearest emergency room. Which I found myself working in some 15 years later or 20 years later. So that's what they do in the prisons. In the psych hospitals, they give them these drugs. Seldom do they tell them what the side effects are. Seldom will they tell them what kind of damage they do to them. If they start having these side effects and the person is not manageable, what they'll do is give them a drug like cogentin to mask these side effects, which are the result of the nervous system being destroyed. That's why they have all these nasty side effects. Your nervous system and your brain are being slowly destroyed, and these side effects come into place. So then they give them, instead of taking them off those drugs, they'll put them on cogentin, which masks those symptoms and allows this process to continue.
Yeah.
So what they're doing is slowly destroying these people and not telling them what is going on. It's immoral.
And when you think about the drive to make people aware of mental illnesses, which is basically lowering the bar, if you like, so more people qualify to be mentally ill. And then they can be drugged as well. So again, the pharmaceutical companies just win-win-win, don't they?
The pharmaceutical companies would love that.
Yeah.
They've got a drug for everything, and if they don't have one, they'll create one. And then, that you see them on television. Oh, yeah, if you have this, ask your doctor about this. I mean, we got Zubsamba. It's the greatest, newest medicine that ever came out. 6 months later, they're being sued for the damages. Except in the U.S., the drug companies have bought off the corrupt Congress, and they can't be sued for a lot of these drugs that they're putting out.
Yeah, because a lot of times when there is a massive court case, once a court case is settled and everybody knows that there's a problem with this drug, that once that court case is settled, that's it. It wipes the slate clean. Simply because it's a bit like the smoking for cigarettes. Once nobody gets sued now for cigarettes because the court case has ended that, and that wrapped up everything in a nice, neat little package. And so nobody can sue a cigarette company now because then everyone knows when they smoke a cigarette that it's bad for you. So you can't sue them if it kills you.
So everybody knows that it's dangerous.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, that's very different with these psych drugs that these guys are dishing out. Very seldom have I seen a psychiatrist sit down and explain the side effects, explain how dangerous these drugs were, explain, what they do is say, you're psychotic, you're schizophrenic, you got to take these drugs for the rest of your life. Yeah. That's a death sentence. That's a sentence for Alzheimer's. That's a sentence for brain damage. That's a sentence for neurological damage, irreversible. And they should be sued a lot more for this than what they are.
And these people are vulnerable as well, aren't they? It's not.
They're
one of the most vulnerable parts of society, aren't they? Because they can't make clear decisions. Obviously, otherwise they wouldn't be in there in the first place.
No, and they're taught, trust your doctor. Trust the psychiatric mafia, and this is what they're doing. The drug companies are in cahoots with the psychiatrists. They're getting kickbacks for these drugs. They're getting free samples to dish these drugs out. They're being paid under the table. They're being wined and dined. The drug companies are some of the most powerful entities in all our countries.
Yeah, they are.
Now, look what's happening with this bullshit
as we see now.
COVID-19 vaccine crap.
Yeah, as we see. And I've heard reports on that people, going back to your lobotomization, people who are doing like spiritual cleansing on people, when they're trying to get through to people on a spiritual level, they're gone. There's nothing there. And they can't get it back. It's like they've had their, I don't know, you said the soul taken away. That's after they've had the jab.
Yeah, I've had patients tell me that there's a empty place in my mind. There's a vacant place in my mind, and I can't fill it, and I don't know what happened.
Right.
So that's kind of what they said it felt like. The mental health system in the West is just a big revolving door. They'll come into the psych hospital, they'll be drugged, they'll be put on medications. Psych medications are awful. They usually will go off of them at some period of time. And then they get in trouble and they come back and they put them on them again. So it's this big revolving door. Each time they're fleecing the insurance companies for tens of thousands of dollars.
Yeah, just rinsing them,
just wringing out for whatever they can get. And after their insurance runs out, they release them. They go off their meds and So while I was working at the state hospital, I noticed that virtually all of them at some point went off their medications.
Right.
And I was I was brainwashed into believing that that's the only treatment there was, So if they lessen the voices, if the meds allow them to function, if they're feeling better on the meds, then why do they continue to go off them? Right? Yeah. So I started asking them, and at the state hospital, there was no deficit of schizophrenics. I mean, there were plenty. I mean, I had a giant population to ask questions to. And the most prevalent, first I started with the staff, and the staff said two things. They weren't curious about why they were going off their meds. They would say, well, that's a symptom of schizophrenia. They go off their meds. That's just what they do. Does a bear pee in the woods? Yeah. They go off their meds. That's what they do. Yeah. And it's like, well, why? And you push them on it. Well, they don't like the side effects, that makes sense. The side effects are horrible. I mean, they're just the darting tongue, nervousness, agitation.
The walk.
With long-term usage. I mean, there's just a whole plethora of nasty, awful side effects. These are not recreational drugs. These are not abusable drugs. Nobody wants to take these.
Which is the worst drug?
Well, one of the most worst, though, is ones that they were dishing out when I started at the state hospital was Thorazine. Right. It did the job. It
Whatever
did the
that
job,
means,
but it was pretty brutal. Right. So now these atypical antipsychotics are coming out with, this has less side effects, but it still does the same damage. Yeah. They're still destroying people's nervous systems with it.
Like I said before, when you see movies and you see all those things, like you said, the darting tongue, and the feverishness and all that, you always think it's the illness. You don't think it's the actual drugs that's doing that to them.
Oh, that's what they want you to think. You know, we were talking before we came on air when researchers, it started out with autopsies. So they started doing autopsies on schizophrenics to find out what they actually died of. And they found out that one after another, hundreds and hundreds of them had their brains were shrunk. So they brought this up, but they published it in the paper. And the psychiatrists and big pharma, their puppeteers, didn't like this. So they come out and they go, oh, that's not due to the drugs. That's due to the schizophrenia. You know, it's a schizophrenia. It's the disease, and it's not a disease because there is no entity that causes it. There is no physical entity that causes it. They want you to think it's a disease. So they're treating a disease, but there is nothing there physiologically. There is
provable. Yeah.
No, they haven't proved anything. Matter of fact, they disproved it. They started out with their chemical imbalance theory. Oh, it's a chemical imbalance in the person's head. They haven't ever found one. Matter of fact, they disproved it. It's a gene. It's a defective gene. They haven't ever found one. They found little bits, and there's like 13,000 genes in there. They don't know what the frick they're doing.
Yeah.
You know, they're just...
Before I'd listened to you, Jerry, I always thought it was from what I've heard and read before, I always thought it was a chemical imbalance of the brain before I started listening.
That's what they want you to believe, and they're still advertising that. Even though it's been proved wrong, they're still advertising it. It's believed that it's a chemical imbalance in their brain. They don't even know what the chemical balance of the brain should be. They have no idea.
Yeah.
And they're out there going, oh, it's a chemical. What chemical imbalance? That's one of the first things I noticed at the Tate Hospital. Oh, it's a chemical imbalance. But I never, ever saw them give any kind of test to find out what was out of balance or by how much. And then
sounds good, though.
I noticed that, and I'm like, okay, if it's a chemical imbalance, why aren't they finding out what's out of balance and correcting it? No. They start out with a shotgun effect. You know, they get their shotgun and, this drug will knock him out. Bam, bam. If one doesn't work, then try another. You know, one after another till they found one that they thought worked best. You know, so I started asking them. I said, if this is a chemical imbalance, why aren't you guys giving some kind of test to find out what's out of balance and by how much? And the psychiatrist said, there is no such test.
Which way's the wind
blowing?
And I'm like, what? Finger, don't they?
So what are you telling everybody there's a chemical imbalance for? I mean, what's out of balance? By how much? Yeah. So I went to the library, I did some research on that, and damned if they did. There is no test.
Right.
There is no chemical imbalance.
It should be a percentage thing that you can say that guy is 75% this, 25% that.
There is none. They don't even know what the chemical balance of the brain should be. Matter of fact, these drugs that they're pumping into these people throw off the chemical balance of the brain, and the brain struggles to come back to the balance it had before.
Right.
So a lot of these drugs actually fade out as far as they're effective, and this because the brain is struggling against them.
Yeah.
So what these antipsychotics do is basically stun the brain. They're like taking a sledgehammer and going bam, just like with the electric shock, only they're doing it chemically. And that's what they did with the electric shock treatment. They put these electrodes on the person's brain, and they run, boom, boom, and.
I read somewhere it's up to 450 volts it can put through somebody's brain.
Well, it's not so much the volts as the amperage.
Right. Okay.
Now I only witnessed this once, and it was, it stunned me. One of my friends called while I was, he said, hey, they're doing a shock treatment in my unit in about half an hour for all these students, for all these psychiatric medical students. He said, you want to come? I can get you in. So I said, yeah, I've never seen one. Let's go see. So here's this Cuban doctor talking to all these medical students, and you could tell he was like a showboat guy. And here's this gurney. And he showed these electrodes, and they were about this big. They're about maybe an inch or an inch and a half square with these wires running through them. And he's talking and talking and talking. You could tell he was loving to talk. I mean, he loved the attention. And all of a sudden, the nurse brought in the patient. And it was this little frail old lady. I mean, she could barely walk. Here she is shuffling in there. And she's got that Thorazine shuffle. So
Yeah.
she doesn't have a normal gait. She kind of shuffles in there, and it's almost like she knew the drill. She lays down in this gurney. They
Yeah.
strap her down, hands, feet, and body across her chest. I mean, she's so strapped down she can't move in this gurney. And I asked the psychiatrist, I said, "Well, what are you doing that for?" And he goes, "Well, if we gave her that shock and we didn't have her strapped down, she would flail all over the place. She'd be totally uncontrollable." And I went, "Well, okay. You know, I guess if somebody's getting shocked real bad, they're going to jump all over the place." So then he pulls out this horse needle. I mean, that thing must have been this big around and this long. And he sticks it in this vial and he draws this milky white liquid into it. And he's looking for her vein, and she's so thin he can't find it. So he's poking her over and over and over again. I'm like, oh my God. Finally he finds the vein, and he squirts this whole big thing of milky fluid into her vein. And I asked him, I said, "Well, what's that?" And he goes, "Well, it's a muscle relaxer." And I said, "Why are you doing that?" And he said, "Well, if we didn't do that, she would break her bones when we gave her the shock. I mean, she would actually convulse so hard that she would break bones." And I'm sitting here thinking, a therapy that breaks bones? This is psychiatric treatment? You know, and I'm like,
it's medieval.
yeah. And I'm like, what's going on here? So, you know, here he is doing his showboat stuff. And then he goes, "Okay, we're getting ready to do the shock treatment." And he flips this switch on this oak box, and a light comes on. And he goes, "Okay, everybody stand back." So everybody stands back away from the gurney, and he flips his switch. But before he does that, he puts those electrodes I told you about. He puts gel on those electrodes,
Right.
you know, both of them. I said, "Well, why are you doing that?" And he goes, "Well, if I didn't put gel on there, it wouldn't make a good connection, and it would burn her skin." And I'm like, "Yeah, yeah. This is your advanced psychiatric treatment. This is." And they put those electrodes on her, and they strap them on there, you know, with that gel. He warns everybody back, and then he flips the switch. And man, it was like this poor lady. She wet her pants. She's convulsing. You know, she's straining against these resistance things, these straps, and it looks like she's going to break loose. I mean, she's just all over the place, and I'm like, I'm horrified. You know, and then I'm like, when's he going to turn the damn thing off? And finally he turns it off. And then he starts talking to the students again. He's not paying attention to her, and I'm watching her, and she's turning cyanotic. She's turning blue. She's dead. Right. And I look and I go, "Hey, you know, look at her. She's cyanotic. She's dying." And he goes, oh, you know, like an afterthought. And he goes and gets that thing where you put on your heart, that cardiac thing, and gives her another shock, and she jumps. And then the color comes back, you know. And I'm like, what the hell? This is psychiatry? This is what they've been doing to 1,300 people a year in this hospital? You know, each one of those caused irreparable brain damage.
Yeah.
But they didn't feel like causing any freaking trouble for a week or two after they got that treatment.
I'll bet.
Yeah. And you know who ordered those treatments in the state hospital? It was the attendants. It wasn't the psychiatrist. They'd go, right. "Hey, Dr. Joe, here, Benny R. here has been giving us a lot of trouble lately. We think he needs another shock treatment." "Okay, put him on the list." Blah, blah, blah. It was all about control and power. It wasn't about fixing anybody.
No.
You know.
No. Doesn't it liquefy the brain, Jared?
It didn't I don't know what it damaged it. I can tell you that. I don't know what the effect of shocking the brain is, but they lost their memories. They would lose sometimes permanently. You know, they couldn't. Their recent memory was wiped out. They couldn't remember what they did the entire week. They're walking around stunned, and this is the same thing they did before they stumbled on shock treatment. They did other kinds of shock. They did insulin shock. They'd fill these people full of insulin until they went into shock, and then they would bring them back, and then they didn't feel like causing trouble again for a few days. You know, in my book we talk about all these horrible things that psychiatry has done over the years to these patients, and is still doing to them today.
I know you can't even.
You know?
It's like something the CIA does to a terrorist they catch. You know, and these are patients that are ill, and they're trying to make them better by torturing them.
Well, so they say.
Yeah, so they say.
So they
yes.
say.
So they say. I read somewhere. I know we're drifting tact here, but was it the 60s where a lot of the leading psychiatrists got together and started naming all these different illnesses? Yeah, and I know. So they could put a drug to or drugs to each of these illnesses. Am I right there? Am I?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. You're right. You know, let me see what it started off with. You know, all of those DSM classifications, those diagnoses, are a complete work of fiction.
Right. Yeah.
They're
and
every single one of them is made up and voted upon. You know, it's interesting that, you know, at the state hospital, all these guys smoked.
Yeah.
So for some reason, the nicotine ameliorates the voices for some reason, but it's addictive in and of itself.
Yes.
You know, so these voices want these people to use addictive drugs. They'll tell them. They'll actually tell them, you know, you don't want to be using that crap. Go out and use alcohol or use meth or use, you know, heroin or something else. I mean, so these voices are conscious. So we were talking about the DSM, the Psychiatry's Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. It started out with like 137.
Jesus.
And then every couple of years, these psychiatrists will get together and they'll make up new ones.
Right.
Including, I remember one time they had Southern Belle syndrome in there. Homosexuality was considered a mental illness. They had to remove that one. And they would vote on these things and say, okay, these are the symptoms. We're going to call it this. Okay, we're going to put it in the DSM, and we're going to make psych students memorize this and psychiatrists memorize this so they know what disorder they're dealing with. Every single one of them is made up. You know, there is no clinical test to verify any of them.
A new one might be disagreeing with the government, like they do in China.
And they're making up more of them every year.
Yeah.
You know, I think in 1952, there was 106 of these diagnoses. By the time 1980 came around, they had 256. Today, they have over 300. So everything is a disorder. You know, now they have a oppositional defiant disorder for a kid that doesn't listen to his parents. They got a disorder for everything.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so I suppose we'll get into that nuts and bolts now. We hit on the voices because that's why we're here, really, to listen to these stories. When was it? This is one of the questions I'm always sort of, after listening to your podcasts and stuff like that. When was it that you realised what you were witnessing was something else?
Well, that was a long time in coming because I was seeing it at the state hospital.
Right.
I could see it. I could feel it. The voices were behind what was going on. Every time they got into trouble, it would be, they would be battling with the voices. One of the first things I noticed was that, I was working out of a psychiatric rehabilitation center run by the Department of Vocational Rehabilitation. So the job of the center was to get these guys stabilized, get them a job, and get them out of the hospital and get them working. So they had to remain stable, but they wouldn't stay on their meds long enough to remain stable. They'd all eventually go off their meds. So this is a story I was talking about before.
Yeah.
And, I asked, well, why do you go off your meds? Well, I don't like the side effects. So, what's worse, the being psychotic, being crazy, or the side effects? So what I did is did a little research project on my own. I wrote down all the symptoms that they had in the DSM-3 that described paranoid schizophrenia. All these awful things that are associated with that mental illness. And then I gave them a blank piece of paper and I said, write down every side effect that you've had from the drugs you were on. And they'd write down a handful of them, 5 or 6. And then I'd give them the check sheet with all the awful psychiatric symptoms, hallucinations, nightmares, voices telling them they were going to kill themselves, all these horrible things associated with psychosis. And I said, check each one that you've experienced. All right? So after they did that, I compared them. I gave them both of them back, and I said, which one's worse? Which one's worse? The side effects of the meds or being psychotic, totally out of it, unable to function, nightmares, having monsters scream at you, demons come out of the walls, shadow people stalking you, voices telling you that they're going to kill you. What's worse? Every single one of them went, being psychotic is worse. And then I'd ask them, well, then why do you stop taking your medications? If you know that being psychotic is much, much worse than the side effects of these medications, why do you stop taking your medications? You know what the answer they gave was?
Go on.
I don't know. And that went on for years. I felt like a crazy guy myself. They've got to know the answer. They've got to know it, because if they don't, who does?
Yeah.
So for years, it went on for probably 3 or 4 years. I kept asking him the same question. If the psychosis is worse than the medication, why do you all keep going off your medications? Because all of them eventually went off them, decompensated back into a psychotic state, got to where they were dangerous to themselves or others, couldn't function, couldn't think, couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. They were on their way out, and yet they went off their medications. Seemingly they should know what would happen if they went off their medications after doing it like 3 or 4 times. So, what I did was, if they went off their medications 3 times, I would discharge them from the program, because that was enough information for me that they're not going to even try to stay on their meds. 3 strikes, you're out. Yeah. So this one gal, she went off her meds for the 3rd time, got in trouble down in the cosmetology class, had to take her out of there, and she was put back on meds. We said, okay, we're discharging you. You proved to us that you're not serious about staying on your meds. And we're going to discharge her. She called her mother, who was in southern Georgia, and the mother went, I can't deal with her. You don't discharge her. Let me come up and talk to you. We'll find out why she did this, and don't send her back here. I can't deal with her. I can't handle her. So I made an appointment for one Friday afternoon, and she drove all the way up. It was like 4-hour drive, and we met with this gal, and both of us are asking the patient, why did you go off your meds again? You knew you were going to be discharged if you did it again. I told you you go off your meds a 3rd time, you're going to be discharged. You're not going to graduate from your class. And her mother's begging her, why? Why did you do it? Why'd you go off your meds? Come on, tell us. And she goes, well, you won't believe me. And I said, well, I work in a psychiatric hospital, a huge psychiatric hospital. I doubt seriously that you can tell me anything that's going to surprise me. Yeah. Why did you do it? And she goes, well, the voices told me not to take the meds. They told me I was being poisoned, and they pointed to the side effects, saying, you are being poisoned by the psychiatrist. And here she is experiencing these side effects, these horrible side effects, and she is actually being poisoned.
Yeah. They're not lying, are they? The voices aren't actually lying.
They weren't actually lying.
Yeah.
But one thing I saw and puzzled me when I first got to the psych hospital, the state hospital, was that these psychiatrists were constantly being pounded on by schizophrenic patients. Right. And it was usually schizophrenic patients. It was usually psychotic patients who were, knocking silly. And none of the others.
Right.
None of the others. And I'm like, that's odd. Why is that? And then I saw that it was only psychiatrists that they were beating up on. They weren't beating up on psychologists. They weren't beating up on psych nurses. They weren't beating up on counselors. They weren't beating up on teachers. And
that was across the board.
That was across the board.
Yeah.
It was psychiatrists, and I looked up their assault rate. Their assault rate is higher than virtually any other doctor in the profession. And then that made sense. Then it made sense that why the psychiatrists were being pounded and nobody else was.
Yeah.
They were dishing out these medications. Now, these medications were toxic. It did appear to the patient that they were being poisoned. They did interfere with the voices.
Right.
I mean, they did significantly interfere with the voices. They lowered their
subdued them.
It subdued them. So the voices couldn't cause as much damage as they wanted to get done.
Right.
So here's this gal comes out and she goes, the voices told me not to take them. They told me I was being poisoned. And then I checked into that, and that she wasn't the only one being told that. So that explained why psychiatrists were being assaulted at such a high rate and were somewhat afraid of psychotic, patients.
Yep. Yeah.
Now at the state hospital, there was this leery. It appeared to me that psychiatrists were leery of psychotic patients, probably because they were getting beat up by them so bad. And I started asking these patients what the voices were telling them. I was like, what are the voices telling these people? Why is nobody curious? Why is nobody asking them? They were all programmed in medical school, in graduate school, in colleges, that these voices are hallucinations. Yeah. That they're unreal hallucinations caused by a chemical brain imbalance which doesn't exist. Yeah. And they're not even the least curious about
they're just following orders, aren't they, on the track? And
they're programmed, they're brainwashed. So Big Pharma has a lot of influence over grants and money that they give to the universities. Yeah. If the universities are teaching anything they don't like or anything other than pharmacology, psychopharmacology with drugs as a cure for everything.
Yeah. They pull They pull the funding.
They pull the funding. We don't like that, or so they hold an awful lot of influence over what's being taught in medical schools.
Right.
Matter of fact, they made it illegal for medical schools to teach anything but psychopharmacology back in the 30s.
Yeah, that was the big Rockefeller funded.
The Flexner report.
Flexner report. Yeah, right. Yeah. I've got that somewhere upstairs. Yeah. Interesting read where they started controlling the whole of pharmacology. Really.
Basically, it said you can't be a licensed doctor, or you can't license doctors if your program is not strict psychopharmacology. Yeah. So naturopathy, electrical treatment, just talking.
Yeah.
Psychotherapy. Any other form of treatment was outlawed, and it was written up and published as quackery.
Yeah, I mean the scary thing at the minute is with I don't know what it's like over where you are, but the social distancing, not being able to meet your family and friends, and all this type of stuff. There's mental illness is going to go through the roof, or it is already starting.
That is mental illness. That's the same exact things that the voices tell their victims. Don't trust anybody. Don't trust your family. Don't talk to them. Stay away from them. Isolate yourself. And when the person is isolated, these things can move in because their mind isn't occupied and just run rampant. Yeah. So what these deep state jerkweeds are telling people with this fake pandemic that has a 99% survival rate, yet they're demanding that these people take these toxic medications that are experimental.
Yeah,
and forcing them, trying to force them to take them, makes you wonder what they're putting in that crap.
I think we can guess, can't we?
Why did they need a vaccine for the flu has completely disappeared? Everything has become coronavirus. Why did they need a vaccine?
That, Jerry?
Coincidence. Why do they need a vaccine for a condition that has a 99% survival rate?
Yeah.
What sense does that make?
Absolutely
people
zero.
are listening to the friggin' mainstream media. Oh yeah, you're all gonna die. You're all gonna die. Just fretting fear. That's the same thing these psychotic voices are. It's the same process. It's the same beings that are running these deep state creeps as drive the schizophrenics.
Yeah,
they're the
funny
same
actually, Jerry,
ones.
because the a point in your book is about a lot of people. What you realise, a lot of these schizophrenics have got no love in their life, have they? And they're totally alone. And then you think, with the thing that's going on now, that's what it's doing. It's causing loneliness and people to be alone.
And that's
who shouldn't be alone.
That's the worst thing you can do for a schizophrenic is to isolate them. because that just leaves the voices to run rampant in there.
Yeah.
Well, look how many isolated people there is now who've got no contact with anybody.
Yeah, it's unnatural.
It's like a mass version of it, isn't it?
We would, in the film that we did with Boris Johnson, a lot of these people who were, let's just say, elite, they go to these boarding schools at a very young age, and a lot of these boarding schools, there's lots of abuse going on, so they're separated from the family. The abuse that's going on there might be physical, obviously mental, because they're separated from the family, and also sexual abuse. And then when they grow up and come out into society, they become prime ministers, for argument's sake, or leaders of business. And it's no wonder that these voices are probably controlling these people as well.
It depends on how they deal with them. Your Winston Churchill, he was abused pretty badly and isolated as a kid, but he turned that around and it made him stronger. But in close to 40 years of working with psychiatric patients, there is no physiological cause. What I've seen is meth, amphetamine.
Yeah.
Will bring on psychosis faster than anything else.
What about alcohol? Does that do it as well?
Well, alcohol has its own form of spirit. That's why they call alcohol spirits.
Right.
So I can tell you a story about that. But meth does something. It just opens up the spiritual protection energy field, and it just allows these things in.
Right. And
I've seen more prisoners go psychotic over abusing meth than any other reason. And here's the deep state pouring meth across our borders, smuggling it across our borders. Yeah. What does that tell you? And the rate of mental illness is soaring from these people.
It's the same over here.
A lot of those drugs. A lot of those drugs, they say that they make them paranoid, don't they? So is the paranoia? Is it the voices? Do you think?
Well, the voices want to instill paranoia and negative emotional energy. So they feed off of negative emotional energy. But we're talking about how they came to being. So it's not a physiological cause. There is no test for it. All of a sudden the person starts hearing voices, usually around the age of 25 or 26 for some odd reason. Sometimes they don't know who they are, what they are. But meth is one of the main causes. Number two is physical, sexual, and bad emotional abuse. Right. So So you got these traffickers that are causing this. They're badly damaging these kids for the rest of their lives. All these Epstein and Pence and Judge
Jimmy
Thomas,
Savile
one of
here.
our Supreme Court judges over here, all blackmailed by the deep state.
Well, the guy over here, Jimmy Savile, he was called Sir Jimmy Savile, very close to the royal family, and he was another. Yeah.
And then you got who's this Prince Philip?
Andrew.
Was it
Prince Philip?
Andrew? Who's part of it? They're causing so much damage by abusing these kids that way. I mean, it's
like you said, Jerry. When they get older and they become meth addicts or drug addicts, and then they lose their teeth and they look crazy, nobody's got that much sympathy for them.
Well,
anymore,
that's so too. And when they emerge from, when these kids emerge or from this abuse, if they ever can escape it without being murdered, they're permanently damaged. They don't know how to socially function. They don't want to stay away from everybody. So that creates a negative thought pattern, which these things are attracted to, like sharks are attracted to blood.
Yeah. That's a good way of putting it. Yeah.
So here's psychiatry going, oh yeah, there must be a genetic defect because there's a 10% increase or some measurable percent increase of children of schizophrenics also becoming schizophrenic. But it's not due to any gene. It's due to the way they were treated and the emotional atmosphere that was set up. So if they're abused, and the voices hate kids, they absolutely hate kids.
Right.
They hate children. So the voices in this person set up the children, so they're favorable for them to move in and take over the kid.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
So
they're not a threat to them, probably.
Well, it's more food.
Yeah.
So they feed off of the negative emotional energy that their victims generate. But you started off on like, how did I come to realize that these things were separate entities?
Yeah.
Well, I was in a state of denial for at least a decade, maybe more.
It's hardly
watching all this
visit.
odd stuff happen.
Yeah.
Until I got a surprise visit.
Yeah.
Watching all this stuff happen. Now, I got in trouble for asking schizophrenics about their voices while I was at the state hospital, because the unwritten rule at the state hospital was you don't do anything to upset patients, especially schizophrenics. Nothing.
That's probably
because
you don't do anything. You don't do anything to find out what the real answers are. Probably that's what that's translated to. Yeah.
So they're afraid of them. I think they don't want to do anything to upset them, because really you don't know what they're going to do.
Right.
Right. So they did get upset when I questioned them, but it wasn't so upset that wasn't something they got over it, until one day one of them went to a psychiatrist and told him, "Hey, this guy's asking me questions about my voices and it's really bothering me. Tell him to shut up." So I found myself up on the red carpet in front of the psychiatrist. Why are you questioning these people about their voices? They're hallucinations. They're not even real. All you're doing is making them worse. You're making them more upset. You're reinforcing their hallucinations. What's the matter with you? Why are you doing this? I mean, that wasn't the only time I got called up in front of a psychiatrist and told not to ask questions about the voices. Yeah. And by that time I knew he was full of crap. Yeah. I knew there was some connection between the voices and the behavior of these people. I just didn't know what it was, but there was some connection. The voices were responsible for them going off their meds. You couldn't talk to a psychiatrist about any of this. So when that gal told me that the voices had told her that she shouldn't take the meds, it was like click. All these other things made sense. The assaults on the psychiatrist, why they didn't want to take the meds, all those things that I were wondering about, clicked into place. Okay, that makes sense. But it was like the voices told her. I mean, the voices are conscious. Now, shortly after that, I got accepted into a PhD psychology program and was preparing to leave for that program. And I was sick of working with schizophrenics. I didn't know why they were doing what they were doing. They didn't make any sense to me. They were frustrating. I got in trouble trying to find out why they were doing what they were doing. And I didn't want to see them anymore. I was ready to be away from them and get into a clinical psychology program. And, but when I got there, it was just more of the same crap. It was just piled higher and deeper, just like they said.
Right.
They didn't know anything more than any of the others. Yeah. And after 2 years of that, I went, this isn't what schizophrenics do. This isn't how they act. This isn't what causes that. It's like, and then I saw you just publish something. Just push you to publish anything. Matter of fact, I was stunned one day when the head of the psychology department, the PhD psychology department, brought all of us students in and started going through teaching us how to lie with statistics and not get caught. So here he was displaying a normal distribution. He was displaying the very 5% of that normal distribution as if it was a population in and of itself, not connected to this other population at all. Like it was a separate entity. And I raised my hand. I went, hey, Dr. De, wait a minute. What's going on here? That segment is a part of this population. How can you display it as separate and independent in and of itself? As if it's something different. And he goes, well, that's their problem. If they can't figure out what I did, that's their problem. So basically, if they can't figure out that I lied with the statistics, that's their problem. And I was shocked. I went into shock. I was like, what? And all the other students are sitting there going, oh, okay, that's how it's done, huh? And I'm like, what? I'm looking around at all the other students, and there was only one other guy in the class he was a good friend of mine, and he looked at me and we went, what? And then we both straightened up like real quick, so he didn't. Oh yeah, we got you. Yeah. Both of us were stunned, like what is going on here?
But even so, you'd still want to know, wouldn't you?
Well, what they want, they don't believe in it for one.
Right.
They don't believe.
Right.
They don't want to know because they're making $3.7 billion on a physiological lie.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, this is you got a chemical brain imbalance. This will fix it, or you got a genetic thing, or these drugs will change your neurotransmitters so you'll feel better. So they're making a fortune, and so is psychiatry on an absolute lie.
Do they get a touch from the pharmaceutical companies then?
Oh yeah, they get all kinds of kickbacks from the pharmaceutical companies. They get free samples. They get taken out to dinner. They get wined and dined.
Holidays.
Oh yeah, they did that at the state hospital. We'd all get together and go, hey, yeah, the pharmaceutical guy's coming down to the lunchroom. And everybody got a free sandwich and lots of food. And yeah, this is great. The pharmacy, and they're usually pretty gals, so they were usually on the eyes too. So they don't believe in it. They don't want to know. They want to believe what the deep state ivory tower and the pharmaceutical companies are teaching them. They make a fortune with this stuff. Oh yeah, they come back. They got these psychiatric drugs that are absolutely awful. They're not abusable. Nobody in their right mind wants to take these things, and even people in the wrong mind don't want to take these things. Nobody wants to take these things. And they're making a fortune writing prescriptions for this because they got them under their control, and you have to go and make an appointment with them once every month or once every 2 months to get these drugs, which cost about $800 a month to keep the person sane.
Yeah.
I found that interesting.
They're making a fortune on this.
I found that interesting, Jerry. I don't know if it was in your book or I heard you talk about it, but like you said just then, most drugs, in some form, they become, teenagers start taking them and pushing them out to, on the street. None of these drugs are those kind of drugs, are they?
You won't find antipsychotic drugs on their menu.
Yeah.
You won't find them there. Yeah, and what's strange is I live 60 miles in Tucson here. I live 60 miles north of the Mexican border. All right, it costs $800 a month to get a month's supply of these drugs here in the U.S. and we're paying for it either through insurance forms or through taxes. You can cross the Mexican border over there, walk into a pharmacy, get the same exact drugs with a Mexican label with the same chemical companies on there for a small fraction, like $75 for a month's worth. So that shows you how badly these people are ripping off the Western world, and you don't need a prescription. What a scam. What a friggin' scam.
I think it's worse than a scam, isn't it? Because they're actually literally killing people, aren't they?
Well, they're destroying their brains.
Yeah.
They're with enough of those and telling them this is the only valid treatment. Everything else is quackery. What's interesting is the voices themselves do not like marijuana.
Right.
They don't want these patients using marijuana. They want them using alcohol or heroin or crack or something else. But if they use marijuana, they complain.
Right. Is that because it naturally sedates them, do you think?
It naturally sedates them, and there's no side effects. There is no addictive withdrawal. The voices want people to use drugs that have an addictive.
Chemical, almost.
Yeah.
Chemical.
So the overall scheme is to they want people to generate as much negative emotional energy as possible. That's what they want. And then they drain that off.
Yeah.
So I keep losing my historical timeline here.
We've gone on tangents, but it's still interesting.
So here, after 2 years in that PhD program, I couldn't take it anymore. I was getting depressed. It was a bunch of crap. I could feel them forcing me to think like they did, and I didn't want to think like they did. I didn't believe like they did. I didn't want any part of this crap. So, I withdrew from the program and came to Arizona. worked in a psych hospital for a while in the ER, and then eventually found a job with the state prison in the psychology department. Now, while there, I started researching schizophrenics and their voices again. Now, the big difference there was that unlike the state hospital, a patient going to the warden complaining that I was asking him about his voices wouldn't even reach the ambient noise level.
Yeah.
The warden would go, "Get out of my face.
Yeah.
What are you talking about, you fool?"
Yeah.
Leave. Yeah. So what I did is I surrounded myself with a number of schizophrenic, criminally insane prisoners,
Right.
who I made an agreement with. That
Probably
I
not
would,
your best choice.
well, I made the best choices I could, given the selection available.
Yeah.
So I made an agreement with them. It was an unwritten agreement. I will do everything I can to help you out and to make you better and help you get better. But the agreement is you have to tell me in real time everything your voices are telling you while we're in session immediately, and not hold anything back. You have to tell me what your voices are saying.
Yeah.
And what it was just like in the state hospital. It was a bunch of negative stuff. You're no good. You're rotten. You're stupid. You're crazy. Don't listen. And they would tell them not to go to the appointments, not to meet with me. And then when they got in there, they'd say, "Don't listen to him. He's crazy and he's stupid." And they'd tell me, "Well, the voices are telling me you're crazy and you're stupid." Yeah. What else are they saying? They're saying to leave. I said, "Tell them they're a bunch of assholes."
I told somebody who's sort of into what we're sort of looking at about your story, and he said as soon as I was telling him, a cold shiver went up his back and his hair stood on end on his arms, and that's the realization of something just clicking into place.
Oh, I've had that feeling many times.
Yeah, that's what we had as well.
I've told your story, Jerry.
Sorry
I've told your story, and every time I tell it, I get the same thing.
Yeah.
Oh, well, there's times I've been scared to death. I mean, I've been terrified, because once I started catching on to what these things were, and they knew it, and that they knew I wasn't going to stop, it got really, really scary.
Yeah.
It got really scary. It got terrifying. But where was I in this timeline here? I was telling you guys, what was I telling you guys?
You've just gone to state prison.
Okay, the state prison. I surrounded myself with guys who were, I always had 15 or 20 of them around me all the time that were telling me what the voices. So what I determined there was, and I was still thinking that these are some part of their subconscious mind. I mean, this isn't, all the evidence is pointing to the fact that these are independent entities, that they're carrying on independent conversations with these patients, that they're telling them to do things that are destructive to them, that they're sabotaging anything positive that they're trying to do for themselves. But still, I was like, I didn't want to see it. I didn't want to hear it. I was like, it's got to be some part of their subconscious mind or there's something, but I knew the voices were responsible. So what I started doing was experimenting with things that would interfere with the voices.
Right.
That would interfere with the message that they were giving these people.
So at this point, you still thought they were subconscious?
I still thought they were subconscious. I did not want to realize that they were separate entities. Yeah. And one thing I knew by the time I got to the state prison, I knew that there was a fellow who wrote 20 Years Among the Dead or 30 Years Among the Dead. He was a dentist, and he would experiment with giving schizophrenic people static electricity shocks.
Right.
And those static electricity shocks would shut the voices up in these patients for varying amounts of time, but they would just go dead. Right. So I was working with Wilson Van Dusen then, who wrote The Presence of Other Worlds. He was a clinical psychologist, and he was retired, and he no longer had access to a clinical population that I did. And I would tell him things that I was trying, and he would give me ideas to try, and he sent me this book. And then he sent me this advertisement for a static electricity shock machine. Like, oh yeah, I'm going to carry this thing into prison and start shocking prisoners with it. What do you want to get me fired, moron? What are you, Mr. Clinical Psychologist? What are you thinking?
Yeah.
I couldn't get away with that.
No.
So here I am, here's this guy saying it works. But how do you prove it? You can't get a shock rod and start shocking prisoners without them locking you up.
Yeah.
So I'm like, how can I prove this? How can I verify this? And I'm thinking that months went by. I'm like, there's something to this. This guy points it out. He wrote a whole book about it. And then one day I'm standing there talking to a secretary, and here's this big rubber band on her desk. And I'm staring at it. And I'm like, rubber band? Why am I staring at the rubber band? And then all of a sudden, boom, I got it. And I grabbed the rubber band and stuck it in my pocket and went. And then on one of the schizophrenic patients I was working with, I found out at the state hospital that they hated the 23rd Psalm.
Right.
The patients were telling me when I repeat the 23rd Psalm, they go nuts. One guy said it was like throwing worms on a hot frying pan. And others say they get very upset. They try to block it out. They start screaming. And I'm going, that's very weird for a hallucination. Why would a hallucination do that? Why would an unreal hallucination do that? But I knew that happened. I knew they didn't like the 23rd Psalm. And the underlying thing, the underlying driving factor in anything I did was if the voices didn't like it, I would give them more of the same.
Yeah.
Because they didn't like it.
Yeah.
So, okay, they don't like it. Hit them with more of it. And of course they got more upset. So finally I go, okay, I got that rubber band. I gave it to one of my prisoners that I was working with. I said, you put this on, and every time you hear the voices, you grab it and you snap it very hard. And that should shut up the voices, and then repeat the 23rd Psalm.
Right.
And then what I do is I call them in once a week, and I'd say, okay, did the thing I give you to try work? And it did. So I gave it to another and another and another and another. The snap on the voices, they said, hurt the voices. The snap on the wrist with the rubber band hurt the voices more than it hurt the patient. That's what they said. And it would stun them and shut them up. And it happened over and over and over again with every patient I gave a rubber band to who was hearing voices. They would snap it and the voices would shut up. And then I'd say, while they're gone, repeat the 23rd Psalm, like give them a sock in the face.
Yeah.
And that was working. It was really irritating the voices. They didn't like to be shut up. They didn't like hearing that 23rd Psalm. They were getting opposition. Then some of them started coming in with their wrist red from snapping the rubber band.
Right.
And then they would break the rubber band. So I would hand out more rubber bands. And then when the chief psychologist found out that I was doing this, he ordered me to stop. He said, no prayers. This is not a prayer place. Leave that to the leave that to the chaplains, and stop handing out rubber bands.
Why the 23rd Psalm, Jerry? I know it's the going into the Valley of Death one, isn't it? I don't know.
Yeah.
Why?
Why? They hate all Bible verses, but they particularly hate that one. They hate the Lord's Prayer. They hate Amazing Grace. They hate people reading the Bible. They hate them going to church. So it's like, here's all this stuff I'm witnessing. And these people are telling me, and I'm going, well, why does a hallucination hate the 23rd Psalm? Why does a hallucination go crazy when they read the Bible? Why is the hallucination telling them to do things that are hurting them? And that was strange, because the ones in the state hospital flew right in the face of everything I was taught in experimental psychology, that, living organisms seek pleasure and avoid pain. But that's not what the psychotics were doing. They were seeking pain.
Yeah.
They were avoiding pleasure and doing the opposite, and seeking pain and disturbance and doing things that caused pain in their lives and turmoil.
And harm,
Why was that? Why was this happening opposite of every other living organism on the planet? Why was this only happening to schizophrenics? Why did behavior modification not work with them? It's almost a behavioral law. No organism seeks to punish and hurt itself. Why were these people doing this on such a massive scale? Psychiatry wasn't asking any questions, and neither was anybody else except me.
Was there anything else apart from, say, a religious thing that the voices didn't like? Or was it just
they didn't like him going to church.
Right.
And I started questioning, since there were so many schizophrenics at the state hospital, I started questioning them as to what happened when they went to church. And they broke down into three groups. If the voices weren't strong, what would happen is they try to convince them not to go, divert them, try to get them to, well, you got more important things to do. But when they got into the church, the voices shut up.
Right.
If the voices were moderately strong, they would try to convince them not to go to church. They try to divert them. Once they got into church, they would start yelling and hollering, and whatever the preacher said, they would start over talking it and said, that's a bunch of crap. This is stupid. Get out of here. If Christ couldn't even help himself, what makes you think he's going to help you? Stuff like that.
Yeah.
Here's a hallucination saying this kind of stuff. And then the worst that tried to go to church, it would just drive them out. They just get up and run out of the church.
Right.
So I'm kind of going, why? What kind of hallucination is this that knows it's even in a church?
Yeah.
What kind of hallucination knows it's in a church?
Yeah.
What kind of... So here's all this stuff adding up, and I'm like, I didn't want to see it. I didn't want to believe that these things were separate demonic entities. I didn't want to believe in demonic entities. I was going, I've been taught, well, it's their subconscious, and Jung and Freud and all these guys say, there's all this stuff there. And then as I'm experimenting with ways to interfere with the negative derogatory messages they're giving to these patients and giving them other positive, more spiritual stuff to read, and they start getting better.
Right.
The voices start getting less, and they're less intense. Then here's this group of patients that are prisoners I have. They're coming in one by one, irrespectively. They don't know each other. It's a big unit, and they're saying the voices, they don't like what you're doing. They don't like what you're saying. They're telling us not to come. They don't like this. They're getting pissed off at you. They're getting pissed off at you. and one after another, different times and different units, all coming and saying the same thing. And I'm like, a hallucination is getting pissed off at me. So here's a hallucination that knows it's in a church. It knows the medicines aren't good for it. It doesn't like psychiatrists. And now it's getting pissed off at me. A hallucination. It doesn't seem like a hallucination to me, but I still didn't want to believe it.
Must have been pretty freaky.
It was freaky. So then the next thing that happens is this one guy that I'm working with who, he was very psychotic when I started working with him. He was on meds. He went off his meds or reduced them. And he stops in the doorway after the session, and he turns and he looks at me and he goes, what you're doing is dangerous, don't you? And I hadn't thought about it. I'm like, what? I just stared at him and go, what? And then he turns around and leaves. And I'm like,
well, was he threatening you, Jerry, or was he
no, he wasn't threatening
you? Yeah.
No, he was more like, do you realize what you're doing?
Right, what you're getting
you
yourself
realize what
into.
you're paying with. Realize what you're getting into. That's what he was doing.
Right.
And I was like, apparently not.
Yeah.
I was still denying that there was something odd about these voices that was anything more than their subconscious. But here's all this evidence mounting that it couldn't be. I couldn't hold together it was starting to come unraveled. My denial system was starting to become very frayed and unraveled. Yeah. But I still held on to it because I didn't want to deal with demons. I didn't want to think about demons. Yeah. I didn't want to have anything to do with demons.
Yeah.
But I did want to know what was causing schizophrenics to behave the way they do and what could be done about it.
Yeah.
So the next one that comes in, it's the same fella, I think, and he's getting better and better, and he comes in without an appointment, and that was one of the agreements I had with these guys. I said, if you're running into trouble, if the voices are getting out of control, you come and you throw pebbles at my office window, and I'll get you in as soon as I can. It was part of our unwritten agreement. So this guy comes in without an appointment, knocks on my door, I open the door, and I go, hey, man, what's up? And he goes, the voices want to talk to you.
What?
And I'm like, what?
Yeah.
A hallucination wants to talk to me? It wants to carry on a conversation with me? I'm like, that's never happened before. It was always the voices would speak through the prisoner, and they would say, "Oh, the voices are saying you're this and that. You're a jerk. You're stupid. You don't know what you're doing. To get out of all the garbage that they say." They would report on it. But this time, these voices wanted to talk to me personally, and I'd ask them, "They want to talk to me personally?" And he goes, "Yeah, they want to talk to you personally." I said, "Well, that's odd. Come on in and have a seat."
All of you.
So, I'm sitting. No, in this case, it was just one voice. It was one strong voice.
Right.
And I'm like, well, what has it got to say? And this came out. His voice changed. It got slightly a little deeper, and these words came out of his mouth. I'll never forget it. He said, "You have no right to interfere with our way of life." Period. Whoa. And I'm like,
where do you go from there?
I don't know where to go from there. I was sitting there. I was stunned. I was absolutely stunned. And then I'm looking at him like, you fucking with me? And he goes, no. That's voices said that. I didn't say that. They said that. That wasn't me. I swear to God, that wasn't me. And I'm like, the voices said that. I'm like, damn. That's when it broke. That's when my denial system snapped. It cracked, and he left, and it was like a warning. Okay, we're giving you a warning, and you better stop. And I didn't.
Did you feel that you'd look behind the curtain in some sort of way there? That was like a big light coming on at that particular moment.
Well, yeah. It was like these things are not hallucinations.
Yeah.
This thing was addressing me. It was carrying on a coherent sentence. It wasn't word salad. It wasn't insanity. It was basically back off.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then the patient left. As he continued to get better, he comes in one day and sits down, and we started talking, and then all of a sudden he got this strange look on his face, and he's just staring at me, and I'm like, what's going on? And then I was weirded out. So we were in the medical unit where psych operated out of the medical unit. And they always had a female guard in the medical unit. So if one of these guys attacked you, they were almost useless.
Right.
You were virtually on your own. So I got weirded out, and I pushed my desk chair back against the wall, and I'm waiting for him to come at me so I could kick him back, because you're basically on your own. And all of a sudden, from behind my head was this loud electrical crackling. It was like crack, 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 crack. It was like an arc welder. And I'm like, what the hell's happening? And it starts going up my office wall on the left-hand side at a 45-degree angle up toward the top of the ceiling, toward the corner. And I'm staring at the wall. I can hear it coming from the wall, but I can't see or smell or detect anything else. And I don't want to take my eyes off of this guy for any length of time, because I'm not sure what he's going to do. He's weirding me out. He's just sitting there staring like, just this blank expression on his face, like void, And so I'm changing my attention back and forth from this noise to him to back to him. And I don't want to lose track of him in case he's, and I see nothing, and it hits the corner, and then it starts going across the ceiling at the back of the office. So now I can keep him and the noise in my view at the same time, but I still see nothing. Nothing. There's no smell. It's this loud electrical crackle. And this is going on for 20 seconds at this point. It's crossing over his head, and then it starts coming down the wall on the left-hand side. And I look at him and I said, "Do you hear that?" And he just stares. He's like, like this weird look on his face, doesn't say anything. So I'm watching him and watching where the noise comes, and then it jumps into this Rubbermaid trash can near my left leg. And I look in there and there's nothing there. It's just crackling, and whatever it is, it's just crackling in there. Like, what the hell is going on here?
Yeah.
And I'm like, ooh. And I look at him, and he's like, just sitting there, like, and I'm like in shock. That I can't explain this at all. There's no explanation whatsoever, none. So, I'm like looking at him, and then he slowly gets up and he goes, "I gotta leave." I'm like, "Get the hell out of here! Go, leave!" So he goes ambling down the hall, and I'm like, "Thank God he's gone! Thank God!"
Yeah,
I'm in shock. I'm in absolute shock. I get up and I start feeling the walls. I'm examining the walls. There is no burn marks. There's nothing there. There's nothing, and it's like I started going, am I getting psychotic? I'm getting crazy. I'm getting psychotic. So I go out to the hallway and I check all the other offices to see if any of the doctors are in. No, none of the nurses, none of the I was the only one in there. The only other person there was out in the front office, and that was the female guard. And I couldn't function. I was in such shock. I shut down all my appointments that day, canceled them all, and just sat there staring out the window all day in absolute shock.
Was that a warning? That warning?
That was
a threat, or whatever you want to call it.
That was a warning, and I ignored it, and that's what happened. So I was in absolute shock. And of course, there was nobody I could talk to about this.
Yeah.
Except other psychotic, other psychotic. And I'm like, I'm losing it. I'm going crazy. I'm getting crazy now too. I'm losing it. I'm getting psychotic.
Yeah. You've been around these people too long, and
I started wondering. Well, I tell you, I'm gone. I'm going. I'm heading in the same direction they are. It's like, what is going on here? What just happened? Why did it happen? So I mean, that was a shock. That was an absolute shock. And I was curious about what happened, but I was so terrified that I didn't call that prisoner in for probably 2 to 3 months later.
I'll bet. Yeah.
And then I filled out a pass and sent him a pass to come back in.
Right.
And I figured, okay, he's going to be in bad shape if his voices could do that. Now, that wasn't the only thing that scared me. I thought they were trapped in the patient's head. Right. I thought the only they can hear them. They're trapped in their heads. They can't come out. I'm safe. They can't bother me. They're stuck in their head, not my head. They're stuck in their head. They can't come out and get me. Well, if they could make my office walls crackle, then apparently they could manipulate physical reality. And then I'm wondering, if they can do that, what else can they do?
Yeah.
What other things can they do if they can do that? Yeah. And I'm terrified. I mean, I'm like, what am I getting myself into here? But I didn't stop working with these guys. I just kind of slowed it up a little bit until I could get my wits about me. Yeah. So I called this guy in about 2-3 months later. He comes in and he looks good. I was expecting him to look a mess. I expected him to be a total freaking mess, because if he looked the way he did when he left my office, they must have pretty much control over him. He comes in, he sits down, he's bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. He looked good. He didn't look depressed. And I was surprised again. I was figuring he'd be a wreck. He wasn't a wreck. And I said, I was expecting you to be a wreck after what happened. And he goes, no, I'm doing fine. I'm doing the exercises you told me to. The voices have they're leaving me alone. I got them under control. I'm feeling okay. I couldn't believe it. So I said, after some small talk, I asked him, did you hear that crackling last time you were in my office? And he goes, yeah, I heard it. And he says, but I'm surprised you did, meaning me.
Right, yeah.
And I said, yeah, I heard it. I heard it well. I said, what was that? And he said, that was them. I said, them, the voices? That was the voices? He said, yeah, that was the voices. So I'm like, Jesus, what the frick is going on here? Yeah. And again, I couldn't talk to anybody about this. I couldn't go to the chief psychologist and go, I was just working with a psychotic patient, man, and all of a sudden my office broke into, like a welding torch, electrical welding torch, and they were crawling up to my office, and then they jumped into the trash can. Yeah. Hey man, we got some drugs for
That's
you,
what I was
buddy.
thinking.
You think you're going to work this job 2 minutes longer? No, we got to do.
And we've got a Cuban doctor waiting for you.
Yeah. It's like, I couldn't even tell my wife because every time I talked to her about this stuff, she just got terrorized. I mean, there was nobody to talk to until I met Sherry Sweeney.
Yeah.
You know, who had suffered with voices as a young kid.
Yeah.
And I had been working with her on prison reform for 10 years before she told me she was hearing the voices.
Amazing.
You know, and then she kept it quiet. So these people don't want to talk about the voices for the very same reason I didn't want to go to my boss and say, I heard these voices. Nobody believes it. Like, oh, you're a weirdo. You're an oddball. Then look what happens. You know, they start telling their friends, oh, yeah, I'm hearing voices. And something's wrong, man. Something's wrong. Yeah, and they're telling me awful things. Yeah, well, something's bad wrong. Maybe I'm not going to mess around with you again too much, you know. So they start losing their friends. And then they tell their parents, and their parents get all upset, and then they start acting out and isolating themselves and doing stupid, crazy things that get them in trouble. And so they tell their parents, and they go, well, we got to take you to a psychiatrist. And then the psychiatrist brings them in, and after half an hour says, well, you're crazy. You got to take these poisonous meds for the rest of your life. And I know they're poisonous, but you don't. So it's okay for you to take.
So just by mentioning it, they're making themselves more lonely, aren't they? Just by bringing the subject up, they're going to make themselves more lonely just by mentioning it. They're going to make themselves more lonely just by mentioning it, because as soon as they mention it, the people are going to retract away from them.
Yeah, they're going to retract away from their crazy. There's something wrong with you. You're possessed. So then they go and they put them on these antipsychotic drugs, and lock them up in the hospital, which is what the voices tell them in the first place. If you start talking about us, people will think you're crazy, and they're going to lock you up. You know, and that's what happens in a lot of the cases.
One thing you talk about, I think it's in your book or in the interviews as well, are the shadow people.
Oh yeah, the shadow people.
And just wanted to explain what they are or they could be.
You know, I'm not exactly sure what they are. Right. Normal people see them out of the corner of their eye. They see a dark flash and they look and there's nothing there. Right. But the schizophrenic people.
Could there be a projection that these things are put?
No, these things are separate entities also.
Right, okay. Right.
I started running into them with the meth addicts that were sent to prison. Right. They would start talking about the shadow people. Right. So once a patient told me about a strange phenomena that they were experiencing, I would remember that, but I wouldn't take it for granted until I started asking others if they experienced the same thing. And once I got a half a dozen of them or so saying they all experienced the same phenomena, then I keep asking that question to see how prevalent it was. And the shadow people were very prevalent with both psychotics, schizophrenics, and meth abusers. They all saw the shadow people. Right. And what they saw for the most part was a 3-dimensional humanoid-shaped being.
Right.
And it was strange that some of them had capes, some of them had hats, some of them had dresses. They never spoke, you know. And then I saw that the ones who were more disturbed, the patients who were more disturbed, and I actually used this as a clinical indicator, the ones who were more disturbed saw the shadow people with either red or lime green eyes. Right. So I'd ask the schizophrenic when I was working in the ER, and I had to determine, okay, how bad is this guy? How bad off is he? You know, do I need to hospitalize him? Do I need to send him to a mental health center? Do I need to discharge him? You know, what do I need to do with this guy? Is one of the questions I'd ask. You ever seen the shadow people? Yeah. Did you ever seen their eyes? Yeah. What color were they? You know, and it would either be red or lime green. No other color.
Do you think these different colours and whether they saw the eyes or not were different levels of these entities? For argument's sake,
I think it was a different strength of the entity. So they were still seeing the shadow people, but the ones with the green and red eyes were more possessed. They were in worse shape. Than the others. You know, and significantly worse shape. You know, it's like an earthquake. A 1.3 earthquake is, you know, a 2.6 earthquake is 10 times stronger than the 1.0
yeah.
kind of
It's
thing.
still
So
an
they were
earthquake, but it's stronger. Yeah.
stronger.
Yeah.
Yeah. But they never spoke. You know,
Right.
they just scared people. They would walk through people. I had patients that they would come through walls. They would appear at the foot of the bed and they just scare people.
Right.
You know, when you turn on the light, they vanished. They were disappeared. And then one time, see, I didn't know what these things were. They seemed harmless other than scaring people. I heard that the Indians saw them, the Native Americans, and they called them the Watchers because they were always watching. The prisoners called them the tree people because they saw them in trees. The guys who were
Right.
using meth addicts, they say, "Oh yeah, those are the tree people." You know, the tree people? Yeah, we see them all the times in trees. I found that odd. You know, but yeah, they knew them as the tree people. And what was odd is that the prisoners would tell me that when they saw them, if they stared at them, they would start coming toward them.
Right.
They knew that they were being looked at. They knew, they were aware that they had been detected. And I found that odd. But that was consistent.
Right.
You know, any prisoner who stared at them told me, yeah, they started coming toward me once I started looking at them. And then they would break off and run or disappear. They'd stop looking at them.
Right.
But, you know, then I ran into this one time who did an experiment with the shadow people. And as soon as he told me that, my ears went perked right up. You know, whoa, let me hear about that. You know, so what he did is he was a meth addict. He was using meth at the time. He was seeing the shadow people. He wanted to know what they were also.
Right.
You know, and him and a friend were both using meth. They both saw the shadow people after they started using meth. They didn't know what they were. What they wanted to do was to know whether they were both seeing the same shadow person or
Right.
not. Were they
Right.
both seeing the same thing, or were
Right.
these independent hallucinations? So what they did is they got in their pickup truck and they went out to, you know, an Indian reservation south of here in the middle of nowhere at night. Drove their tech there, and one of them shot up with meth, and he started seeing the shadow people. So he pointed out to the other one. He goes, "You see that one over there by the tree?" "No, I don't see it." "Well, how about the one over there by the cactus? You see him?" "No, I don't see him at all." "No. How about the one over there by the back of the truck?" "No, I don't see him either." So they came to the conclusion that they needed to be on meth to see these things.
Right.
All right.
Yeah.
So the other one shot up, and once the drug took effect, then they both started pointing him out. "You see that one over there? You know, what's he doing?" "Well, yeah, he's just watching us." "How about that one over there by the tree? You see him?" "Yeah, I see him." You know, so they saw the same ones.
Yeah.
You know,
Do you think
and they
this?
kept pointing them out. You
Yeah. I
know, the
think
whole
meth
night.
opened that door for them to see. Yeah.
Yeah, it opened up something.
Yeah.
You know, but it also left them vulnerable.
Yeah.
So here they are when they're tracking these things and pointing them out. You know, "I see that one. I see this one. What's he doing? He's doing this." Da, da, da. So they came to the agreement. Yeah, they're both seeing the same thing, but they all started moving in toward them. You know, just like the other prisoners told me,
Yeah.
they all started moving in toward these two guys, and they circled the entire truck. And these guys freaked, and they got into the truck and they locked the doors.
Yeah.
And they closed the windows, and they're still watching these things. And then this fellow told me, he said, all of a sudden the back of the truck went bam, and the front came up like a giant 10-ton boulder falling in the back of the truck. And they looked in the back, and the whole back of the truck was full of these shadow people, you know. And this happened, I think, before the crackling thing. So I'm like, okay, that's another verification that they can do something to physical reality. If they can make a truck recoil like that, then they can affect physical reality. You know, so that was not good news to me.
Yeah, I bet.
That's not anything I wanted to hear.
Yeah.
You know, but it registered. You know, so once that happened, they started the truck and they went out of there at lightning speed, almost wrecked the truck getting out of there. And I asked him, I said, "Did they follow you?" And he said, "No." You know, so that was verification that they were seeing the same things. Now, I didn't think they could speak at all, because here's scores of psychotic and meth patients that I'd worked with, none of them reporting that these things said a word.
Right.
You know, maybe 100 or more. Not single one ever said they spoke. They just silently appeared and disappeared, walked through walls, scared people, did whatever they did, surrounded people, but they never spoke. And then one day, I was working this is after I got out of the prison. I had retired. I had a job doing psych crisis in one of the major hospital ERs. And it was Christmas Eve. And there, thank God it was quiet. There weren't a lot of psych patients coming in. And all of a sudden this one guy appeared, and he was a meth addict, and he was shaking like a leaf. He was just like this the whole time. He's just like this. He's shaking. He comes in, he says he's hearing voices, he's in bad shape. They were telling him to kill himself, and I started asking him, well, do you see the shadow people? He goes, yeah, I see the shadow people. I see them all the time. You see their eyes? He goes, yeah, I see their eyes. Well, what color are they? They're red. And I said, out of some reason, I don't know why I even asked this question, because I asked it a million times before and got the same answer. I said, well, have they ever spoken to you? And I'm thinking, well, this guy had been injecting it for 10 years. He should have been dead years ago.
Yeah.
I didn't know of any patient who'd been injecting meth for 10 years and was still alive. That was an anomaly to me. I'm like, what is with this guy? Why is he still alive after injecting meth for 10 years? It's clear he's psychotic as a bedbug. Why is he still alive and everybody else who did that dead? So I, for some reason, I just asked him, I said, have they ever spoken to you? And he goes, oh, yeah, they spoke to me. And I said, well, what do they sound like? And he made this high-pitched squeal, like they sound like, it's this weird, high-pitched, eerie squeal that he mimicked. And that sent goosebumps.
Shivers, yeah.
Up my back, just listening to him trying to describe what they sounded like.
Because when I'm listening to you there, Jerry, other people listening maybe, because they'll think, well, it's because they're on meth that they're seeing these hallucinations. But that couldn't happen to so many people seeing exactly the same thing. They couldn't hallucinate.
You don't have to be on meth to see them. You don't have to be. Yeah,
but not only that, even if they were all on meth, they couldn't all see the same thing. It just wouldn't add up, would it?
No.
I'm on about if it were an illusion, if it wasn't just an illusion.
Try to catch one.
Exactly, yeah.
Go ahead, try to catch one.
There is no way.
The thing is, if you got hundreds of patients all telling you the same thing,
they
all do the same thing. If you stare at them, they come at you.
Yeah.
They walk through walls. They appear out of nowhere.
Yeah.
You turn the light on, they vanish. They never speak.
Yeah.
Here's all these hundreds of patients all saying the same thing who have never met one another.
Exactly. Yes.
Have never seen one another, and they're all saying the same thing.
Yeah. That's
so
not just haphazard, is it? That's not.
No, that's not.
Yeah.
That's not coincidence.
No, it can't be. It's impossible.
So I asked this guy. I went to ask him some more questions, and all of a sudden he goes stark still from shaking from the whole time he was in there. He goes stark still. And then his eyes just got black, his pupil just black. And I'm staring, and he was no longer there. That wasn't him looking out of those eyes anymore. There was some monster in there just staring at me. And one thing I learned early on is you can't show any fear.
Yeah.
Because they will jump on that like a dog chasing somebody who's running from them.
Yeah.
So I had to sit there and I had to stare this thing down. And it just felt like forever. It just felt the blackest, deepest, darkest hatred that I've ever experienced in my entire life. These were like two dark pools of hatred in his eyes that just went to infinity, and it was like, whoa, and here I am staring at him with a blank poker face inside going, what the shit is going on? And how long is this going to last? I can't deal with this much longer. Yeah. So it was a stare down, and then finally, boom, it vanished. It just, as fast as it had come, the guy's normal eyes came back, and he started shaking again, like, and I went, what was that? And he goes, well, that was one of the shadow people. And I'm like, what? Because I'd never known them to do that before.
Possess someone, basically.
And he said, I talk to them all the time. And I said, well, what do they tell you? And he said, well, one time they told me to go out to the road and jump in front of the truck and that I wouldn't be hurt. And I said, well, what happened? And he said, well, I went out to the road and I waited for a car to come by, and I jumped in front of it and it hit me and it threw me across the road. And I said, well, what happened? He said, well, all the shadow people came around me and they were looking down at me and they said, get up, you're not hurt. And he said, I got up and I wasn't hurt. And he said, they told me to do it again. I did it again and I wasn't hurt. And I'm like, as soon as he told me that thing came back again.
Yeah.
Those eyes and with the dark thing. And it was the same thing again, only it seemed more intense and more angry that I had got that information out of him. And it's just staring at me with this aggravated hatred. And I remember thinking, that thing is looking at me. And if I had to put it into words, it would be like, I'd rather slit your guts and spread them all over this room than say another word to you.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I went, after it disappeared the second time, I went, okay, go, get out of here.
Yeah, get out. Yeah. I've heard enough. Yeah.
I can't deal with this anymore.
You've mentioned,
5 minutes.
You've mentioned
later,
hierarchies before, Jerry, like hierarchies in these voices.
Yeah,
Do you think they're a hierarchy, the shadow people?
The shadow people,
from what you said, it sounds like they're
just based on that one incident. That's all I have to go with, is that thing could do that. That's a pretty powerful thing, to have somebody jump in front of a truck or a car and not get hurt, or to come out. And I mean, if anybody looked at you like this thing looked at me, it would give you the willies. I mean, I guarantee you would bug out of there.
Yeah.
But
it sounds like they've taken a different method to take over it, rather than the voices just appearing in the head. They've actually, like you said, they came in and took them, kind of thing. So it seems like slightly different method.
I don't know. I still don't know what those things are.
Yeah.
I don't know what the shadow people are, but they are there, and they're not good things.
No.
They don't do any good. They basically scare people.
Yeah.
So where was I before we got off on the? Oh yeah, I was telling you about that prisoner that came in and I called him back. He said that was the voices.
Yeah.
And then I asked him. I said, "What were the voices telling you when you shuffled out of the office and said you had to leave? What were they telling you?" And he turns around, he looks at me and said, "They were telling me to go get a shank and stick it in your gut."
Jesus.
And I went, "Yeah, I worked with this guy for 6 months. He would never do anything like that." And so I asked him, I said, I'm confident. I'm like, oh, yeah, you wouldn't do anything like that. But you better check and just make sure. I said, well, why didn't you do that? And he goes, because I couldn't find one. And I went, whoa.
Yeah, whoa.
You thought you were going to say, because you're a nice guy, Jerry. I don't want to kill you.
Yeah. That's what I thought he was going to say. I would never do anything like that to you. I mean, you're a good guy. You're trying to help me out. No, that's not what happened. So I'm like, what am I freaking playing with here? Yeah. What are these things? What are they doing? Why? I knew then that they were entities.
Yeah. Going back to the hierarchy. What did you notice about the hierarchy in the voices? Not the shadow people, the voices.
Well, the voices, it was there was a period of time where I would actually carry on conversations with them, like Van Dusen did in his book.
Right, yeah.
He would actually carry on conversations with the voices.
Right.
And he once gave them a series of psychological tests and said, okay, I want the voices to respond to my psych tests and not you. You're just the voices. And when he scored them up, he found that the psych tests showed that the voices were more psychotic than the actual patient.
Right.
When he compared the two tests. So his book is The Presence of Other Worlds.
Right.
By Wilson Van Dusen.
Yeah, I'm going to get that, Jerry.
I'll have to have a look at that. Yeah. We're going to have a look at that one. Yeah.
So he was a student of Emanuel Swedenborg, who was a Christian mystic who lived 700 years ago and had complete access to heaven and hell. And he would come back and he would report on the spirits he met there. Right. So when he came back one day after reporting on the spirits that lived in hell, Van Dusen noticed that what he was saying exactly matched what his schizophrenic patients were telling him.
Right. Yeah.
So at some point I went and got that book Heaven and Hell by Emanuel Swedenborg and found that indeed what his patients were telling him were the same thing my patients were telling me, and that the description of the evil spirits that Van Dusen was talking about exactly fit the description and the behavior of the psychotic voices.
Just amazes me. And so the hierarchy, what types of different voices were there?
There's all kinds of different voices. Some of them are smart, some of them are stupid, some of them are very sly, some of them are retarded. But the thing is, they're all negative.
Right.
They were all negative. And the prisoners who said they heard positive voices, that fell into two categories. Either they were saying they were Christ or some positive spirit that could help them out with things. And indeed, they knew things that the prisoner didn't.
Right.
They, especially with drug addicts, the prisoners would tell me that the voices, when they run out of drugs, the voices would tell them where and when to be to get more amphetamine. And if they showed up there, a complete stranger would show up with those drugs and sell them to them. They would tell the prisoners which houses to rob, when to rob, and generally the general area where the loot was, but not exactly. They tell them where to hide from the police. They knew things that the regular person just didn't know.
So even though it were positive, it weren't really positive. There weren't positive actions.
Yeah. And see, I had one I talked about this in some of my other things, where this guy was hearing voices. He was in San Diego. He was using a lot of cocaine and meth, and the voices told him, "Hey, we know where there's a sesame pot field. Get you got $250. Take that. It's up in Oregon. Take that, and I'll show you where it is." So this guy trusted his voices enough to take that $250 for gas, and the voices told him to get 3 burlap bags and something to cut the stuff down with. So he trusted him. He drove all the way up to Oregon from San Diego, all the way up to Oregon, and the voices are telling him turn by turn where to go, when to be there, where to turn, where to go. And then he found himself on back roads, heading for the mountain on dirt roads. And after about 23 miles of dirt road, the road ran out, just dead ended. So he stops and he asked the voices, "Okay, what do I do now?" And they said, "Well, get your machete and get your 2 bags or your 2 burlap sacks. And there's a path up to the left there. It's a couple hours up the path. Start taking the path, go up there." So he followed what they said. And 2 or 3 hours later, he comes across this huge sesamelia pot field, just, ripe, good stuff. And he starts cutting it down, fills up the 2 sacks, and he asks the voice, "Well, okay, what do I do now?" And the voices say, "Well, carry them down to your car. We know a place in the park where you can sell them." So he carries him down to his car, goes to the park where the voices told him to go to sell the drugs, and he starts selling the marijuana, making a fortune.
Yeah, I bet.
And he bought himself all the liquor he could deal with. He bought himself all the prostitutes he could handle.
Yeah.
He bought himself all the crack and all the meth that he could use.
So they're basically helping him go further down the mire, aren't they?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. But what was strange, he said the voices wanted to go fishing. And I'm going, "Come on, you're shitting me. You're messing with me." He goes, No, they wanted to go fishing. He said they told him to go buy a fishing rod, and they went down to the Columbia River, and he's fishing, and they're telling him where to throw his hook, how long to leave it there, and when to move on. He's the only one catching any fish on the river. So he comes out with this whole big slew of fish, and the voices love the fishing. So he does that for about 2 weeks, and then after the 2 weeks, he goes up there again after he runs out of money, and he's starting to go up there again. And the voices said, "No, they're waiting for you. If you go up there this time, they're waiting for you. They're going to kill you. Don't go up there. Take the money you got and go back to San Diego where you came from." So he did. And I'm like, "What? What?" And he was sincere. And this was after we'd gotten rid of his voices, so he was completely sane at that time. When he told me that story, he was completely sane. The voices were gone.
Me and Christian Cole have a conversation around. I don't know if you know the kids' cartoon made in the early 2000s called Monsters Inc. And Monsters Inc. was about monsters from another dimension going into kids' bedrooms via the wardrobe or whatever, terrifying them and containing the energy from the fear and taking it back into the dimension and utilizing it. Yeah,
that's what actually happens. That's what actually happens. And what I noticed is that after the voices attacked, the schizophrenics had no energy left.
Right. Just drained.
No energy. They were completely drained. Yeah. They couldn't. They would come in. They dragged themselves in for an appointment. They go, the voices attacked me last night. I don't have any energy. I couldn't sleep. So what they do to these patients, they do the same things that we do, the Army does to prisoners of war. Yeah. They don't let them sleep. They don't let them eat. They're constantly harassing them. They're constantly at their throats. They do the same thing that they do to prisoners of war. But one thing I noticed was that every time the voices attacked, and this is hundreds of patients told me, that their energy level just vanished.
Right.
And I'd say, well, where'd your energy go? Did you use it? No, I didn't use it. I was in bed all night. I was just tossing around in bed. Well, what happened? So I just assumed that it was because of how disturbing the voices are. They're very diabolical. They're very nasty. They're very abusive. They're very negative. They're liars. They're deceitful. I figured, well, just if you're being harassed that way all the time, and your anxiety level, you're always on edge. You're always paranoid. You're always scared. You're always suspicious. I mean, that'd probably drain your energy level.
Yeah.
So one day, I'm sitting in my office at the prison, and here comes a call in from the captain of the jail for the prison. So they always assign me to the worst, nastiest units at the prison, and this was the jail for the entire prison complex. So the worst of the worst went there.
Yeah.
From all the high custody units. So I get a call from the captain who's running that unit saying, hey, listen, we got a inmate in here whose roommate is crazy as a bed bug, and he's off meds, and he's hearing voices, and he was standing over his cellmate at 3 a.m, just staring down at him, just standing in the dark, staring at him. And he's been doing this, and you got to do something about this because the other guy's going nuts. So, I looked both of them up on the computer system. His cellmate, the guy who was crazy. He was a schizophrenic. He was hearing voices. He was off meds. And he was stuck in this little bathroom type cell with this other guy where there's no room. There's no escape. You got 2 beds and enough room to walk to the toilet. That's it. And then I get a inmate letter from the guy who's the crazy guy was standing over looking at. And he goes, you got to help me. I can't deal with this. This guy's nuts. He's standing over me at night. He's weird. I'm afraid he's going to do something to me. And so I look up his record, and the reason he was put into the CDU was for protective custody. What he did was snitched off a drug deal that the Aryan Brotherhood were carrying on. And they busted not only the group members, they took all their drugs, and then they split the leaders of that up and sent them to prisons all over the state. Right. So that was a major blow to that gang on that complex. And they wanted him dead. And they wanted him dead so bad that they started getting in trouble to get sent over to the CDU so they could get a chance to kill this guy. And some of them made it over there, and they were throwing notes under his prison cell door saying, we're here, we're waiting on you, we're waiting for a chance to get you. They'd already stabbed him once. Right. And they were out there, going by his door and throwing notes under his door saying, we're waiting for you. First chance we get, you're a dead man. Yeah. And he's stuck in there. So you couldn't be under more stress than that, other than maybe in a war. Here you are in a maximum security unit, stuck in there with a flaming psychopath who's staring at you in the dark, looking down at you.
And you've got the Aryan Brotherhood after you.
And you've got the Aryan Brotherhood who's already stabbed you once, and now in that jail, waiting to get a shot at you again. Now, what was what was interesting about this is that you couldn't have a better experimental situation. Everything was controlled. These two guys were in the same cell, eating the same food with the same guards around the same inmates in the same building. Everything was equalized.
Yeah.
Except what was going on with them.
Yeah.
So I pulled the first guy up, the guy who the gangsters were trying to kill, and I'm watching him very closely, and he just bounds up the steps, up to the interview room in the control room, or next to the control room, and let him in, and he's telling me what's going on, and this guy's weird, and he's talking to himself, and he's hearing voices, and he's standing and cursing at nothing in the air, and acting weird, and throwing things around the room, and scaring the crap out of him, basically. I already knew that the Aryan Brotherhood was after this guy. And he's animated, he's coherent. He's got plenty of energy. He's scared, he's somewhat depressed, but he's not, he's got plenty of energy. He's like, I got to do something. You got to help me. You got to get me out of here. You got to do something about this. So, okay, I'll do what I can. I don't have a lot of power when it comes to, where inmates are assigned, but I'll see what I can do. And he goes back in the room, and I call out the second guy, the guy who's hearing voices. And he just can barely make it up the steps. He's walking very slowly. He's struggling to get up the steps. He doesn't have any energy. He sits down, and he's like a limp dish rag. He's just like sitting back in his chair, and he's like, and he's talking slowly and indistinctly, and you could tell he's just drained. He looked like somebody who'd been up for a month. And he was hearing voices, and I asked him if when the voices attack, his energy level disappears, and he said, "Yeah, my energy level's completely gone." That didn't make any sense. It was like, okay, so it can't be anxiety. I mean, if it was anxiety, this guy would have been in worse shape than he is. The voices have something to do with their energy disappearing.
Yeah.
And then I started questioning other inmates. When the voices come, does your energy disappear? And yes, one after another, up into the hundreds. Yeah, when the voices come, I'm completely drained. Some of them said I can even feel the energy leaving.
Right.
I can feel them draining me. And the ones there was one guy I was working with, this guy completely recovered too. He was being beat up by the voices all night, and he showed up in my office for an appointment the next morning, and he said they were beating on him all night, and that he was completely drained. So there was a correlation between their energy levels disappearing and the voices.
Yeah.
So I started asking him. I said, "Well, did you use that energy?" No, I didn't use that energy. I said, "Well, where did it go? If you didn't use it, where did it go?"
Yeah.
And then they didn't ever think about it.
Yeah.
They didn't ever think about it. And every once in a while, one would say, they took it. They took it. And they got stronger when they took it.
Because if we look at what's happening around us, the whole thing is fear-based society now, isn't it? And so
exactly.
the drain on energy for everybody, even if you're fitting well, is happening.
It's a hog's trough for these entities. It's an absolute hog's trough.
Yeah.
All this fear that they're pushing over the television, these things are feeding on it.
Yeah.
People need to stand up to this bull crap.
Yeah, they do. You're right.
They have to. They have no choice.
Yeah, but you've got to do that, sadly. You've got to accept that there is something else out there other than what we've been told.
Well, you could just resist the deep state. And, I have a mask that I put on there. This mask is as worthless as Biden.
Yeah.
And if they make me wear it into a store, I'll put that on and go, I got my mask on, son of a bitch.
Yeah.
And then
so you're fighting back. Yeah.
I'll just walk in and get kicked out. Well, you got to have the mask on in here. Well, screw you. I'm not putting on a mask. Well, then you can't be in here. I said, okay, I'll go somewhere else and get my stuff.
Yeah. You sound like us too.
People need to start standing up to these idiots.
Yeah, you sound like us too. We haven't worn a mask all the way through this, but anyway. We're talking about all the negative stuff. Is there anything you've come across where there are actually positive voices or is it
Yes.
all negative? Yes.
No, there are positive voices, but what you got to be careful is a lot of these negative voices will pretend that they're positive.
Comment.
They'll say,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm Jesus Christ, or I'm
Yeah.
Peter, or I'm da 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 da, and I have special powers, and
Yeah.
they do know stuff that people don't know. So some of the stronger ones may be able to give a piece of information, or say, I remember one time with another inmate that fully recovered, he said the voices told him that they pointed out to him another inmate on the prison yard and said, that guy's going to assault you, be careful.
Right.
And so he said, the next morning, he just had taken a shower and his head was full of water, and he was whipping the hair back and getting the water out of his hair. Just as that guy came into the shower room, and he did that, and it splashed in his face,
Right.
and that guy did assault him.
Right. It gave him a reason to assault him. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that specific guy.
Right.
The guys with the meth, the ones who are saying, well, you go to this place, you be there at this time, there'll be meth there for you. So they know things, or they can know things that the individual doesn't, and they say, yeah, we're good, we're for you, we're going to help you, we're going to, they'll help you sink, they'll help you get drugs, they'll help you destroy your life. And with drug addicts, that's fine. Oh yeah, you tell me where to get heroin, that's great. You tell me which houses I can rob and get away with, that's great. I love it. Yeah.
So,
but there are levels of them.
yeah.
It seems like there's all different strengths. Some of them are real stupid. Some of them are very sly,
Right.
but they can reason. They are intelligent entities. They can figure out how to get to you. They can figure out what gets you, and they do have complete access to your entire memory. They can go in there and they can bring up stuff that you'd forgotten that you'd done, rotten stuff that you'd done, decades ago, and bring it up and rub it in your face.
Yeah. That's and from what when you listen to everything that you've said, not just on this podcast, but on the other stuff and in your book, everything they do is to basically destroy humans.
Yes,
and
they
it's
hate humans.
It's like they're and I'll use it as a corporation where they're solely aimed, like Coca-Cola are to make drinks, if you like. They're solely aimed at destroying humans, and they've got a management team and etc. and people working, doing the hod carrying, if you like, doing the day-to-day grunt work. And then you've got the management and the upper echelons coming in when they're needed as well. And so,
same thing with the cigarette companies.
Yeah, exactly. We're up to 2 hours 10 now, so we'll probably wrap up this first podcast, I hope, and we'll go into that other one with your friend. But have you got anything else you want to cover?
Well, what I can do is give you a very brief. Now I have this written in much more detail, but just the patterns that these voices run. Yeah. See, psychiatry, the psychiatric mafia, the drug, big pharma, and the entire medical establishment are telling us that these voices are hallucinations.
Yeah.
No. They run very specific patterns, and I got a listing of them here, and I'll briefly go through them.
Yeah, go through
them.
They
are consistently negative. What they tell the people is negative, derogatory, insulting, abusive, and destructive. Consistently.
Yeah.
And this is among all the patients I work with, the schizophrenics I work with in Georgia, 2,500 miles away from here. We're hearing the same things that the voices were telling them, that the schizophrenics were hearing it from their voices in the prisons, in the ERs, and in the psych hospitals here. They're all like they're made from the same cookie country. They're all anti-religious. They don't want you reading the Bible. They don't want you going to church. They don't want you praying. They don't want you doing anything. They hate the 23rd Psalm. And those who don't believe it and are hearing voices, go ahead and repeat that a few times. Watch what your voices do with that. They react to the 23rd Psalm like worms thrown on a hot frying pan. They constantly strive to create negative emotion. They can do that by having access to your complete memory. They can go in there and pull up stuff that you've forgotten, and they rub it in your face. Do you ever think why animals that, I watched one time where an animal got chased by it was a gazelle or something, got chased by a lion, and it barely escaped. And once it got out, the lion walked away and it looked around and all of a sudden it was gone. It just went back to doing what it was doing. Not human beings. They screw up and it's like, yeah, you stupid son of a bitch, you did this. And yeah, well, why'd you do that? Now look what you've done. That's them.
Yeah.
So they energetically drain their victims with this negative diatribe stuff. Yeah. And what's interesting is they consistently get louder after sunset. When the sun goes down, they get louder.
And that's what parasites do. That's what parasites do. Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Full moons and things like that they become. So these are physical parasites that you have inside you. In the evening, they become active.
Well, that's interesting.
Like an earthworm would, if you like, because they're in the dark, aren't they?
Huh.
Yeah.
Well, I guess, that's...
And it must be a frequency thing.
Yeah, and that moon thing, the full moon thing, I knew that we were in trouble those nights I had to work the ER when there was a full moon. I mean, there was, we just braced ourselves. Full moon, brace yourself. They come most strongly between 3 and 4 in the morning.
Right.
They constantly foster self-destructive behavior. They generate as much turmoil and sabotage any positive thing that the patient is trying to do for themselves. They foster isolation, just as these SOBs in the deep state are trying to do now with their made up
nonsense.
Pornovirus bullcrap. Yeah. They want people isolated because when people are isolated and their minds are not occupied, they can move in there and they can occupy that space. They demand the attention of the victims. They're constantly doing something to grab your attention and swing your attention towards some negative end. They're constantly maneuvering for increased control over their victims. Do what we say. If you don't do this, they gaslight. They'll do stuff like saying, "Oh, you never did bring your wallet," or "You never did have a wallet," or kind of play with reality, like, "Oh yeah, you lost your wallet down by the stream," or when it's complete lie. Most of what they say are total lies and deception.
So it's the $1 million question: where are these things? That's the
$1
million question. But
they're all over.
Are they here? Are they in another dimension? Are they here?
Well, they're in a spiritual dimension.
Yeah.
They're invisible to us.
Yeah. It's like the dog whistle, isn't it? Where a dog can hear it and we can't. It's the same sort of principle, isn't it?
Right. But what you can tell is by these things, and all of us get hit by them, not just schizophrenics.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Schizophrenics are that end where they're most volatile. Yeah. But every negative thought that comes into your mind about yourself or anybody else, any fearful thought is put there by them. And man, they are getting a feeding trough now with this bullcrap coronavirus horseshit.
Yeah, no doubt.
They demand that the victim not tell others about them because they'll get locked up. They're consummate liars. They can't be trusted to keep any bargain they made. There was one patient where they told, "If you gouge out your eye, we'll go away and we'll never bother you again." And he gouged out his eye, and they came back and they went, "You stupid fool! You listened to us. That's your fault." You know?
Gouge out your other eye.
Right. Now, psychiatry saying, "Well, these are hallucinations. Just ignore them." If they're ignored, they get louder.
Yeah.
They consistently get louder. If a psychiatrist would even think to follow up with that,
the trail of evidence,
they find, they get louder. They won't be ignored. They consistently steer the victim away from anything that might generate any kind of joy for them. They can manipulate feeling without speaking. So you're sitting around, contemplating the universe, and all of a sudden you start feeling like, oh God, this feels awful. And then you start thinking negative. So they can hit from the other way too. Boredom is bad. They want to keep you bored and isolated.
You're just basically talking about what the whole globe is going through at this minute in time, aren't we?
Yes, exactly. It's on a macroscopic scale.
Yeah.
They try to pass themselves off as thoughts belonging to the victim.
Yeah.
So a lot of schizophrenics will ask the voices, "Well, who are you? What are you?" And guess what the voices tell them?
What?
They say, "We are you. We are you.
We are you. Not
we are you."
Yeah. No.
It's just like you have no right to interfere with our way of life.
I mean, the only way they could say that to make it look like it is them is "you are you," not "I am you" or "we are you." Yeah.
Yeah. What they want to do is they're like lions or tigers hiding in the jungle.
Yeah.
They hide among your regular thoughts,
Yeah.
and then they'll come out and they'll inject a negative thought into your thought stream to make it look like it's yours.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, but the rule is their intention is different from yours. They have a negative intention for you. You know, and that intention is different from your intention for yourself.
You've got to ask yourself, any negative thought, is that them? Any negative thought. It's got to be, hasn't it?
Well, most.
Yeah, most, yeah.
I would say most. Any negative thought about yourself or others is from them.
Yeah.
You know, any frightful thought they will take and they will try to amplify. They will do anything they can to destroy your positive self-concept. They will attempt to pull the victim away from consensual reality into an alternate negative reality. They use confusion as a means of instilling negative suggestions. So they'll get the person really confused, and then they'll throw in a negative suggestion, and the confusion is, you know, discombobulating. Nobody wants to be confused, and then they'll jump on that negative suggestion.
Yeah.
So it's like they insert it that way. They are aversive to anything positive or beautiful. They hate kids.
Right.
They hate little kids for some reason. They just hate them. And, you know, anytime I found that there was a schizophrenic mother or schizophrenic father, I would take action.
Right.
You know, because they will try to get that person to destroy the kid. They do have reasoning ability, and they have various degrees of intelligence.
Right.
So these things are entities. They are not, you know, and they hit everybody. They don't just hit schizophrenics. They hit everybody.
Yeah.
You know, how many times have you been walking around and all of a sudden you get this horrible thought that just bursts into your head, and you go, I would never do that. And you just chill just thinking about it. I wouldn't do that. What? No, I wouldn't do that. Yeah.
My missus said to me, Jerry, she said,
Yeah.
when you're on the tube and there's someone stood and the train's coming, do you ever get the urge to push them onto the tracks? And I said, not really, no. She said, I always get it.
No, but that does happen. That does happen.
Yeah.
That happens all the time. Somebody
Yeah.
gets pushed in front of a train. You know, and even with these, you know, unprovoked attacks.
Yeah.
You know, and a lot of these mass murderers that get a gun and kill everybody, a lot of them are hearing voices telling them to do that.
I was thinking, you know, Jerry, you know, like I'm just thinking as we were talking, the religious thing, and basically what you're doing when you're pointing out to the schizophrenic that the voices aren't them. That's what an exorcist did, isn't it?
It's kind of an exorcism, but the thing is with exorcisms, you're not the one getting rid of them.
Yeah.
The exorcist.
He's acknowledging that they're a different entity, and it's not part of that person.
Yes. So the exorcist can get rid of them, but I have my doubts as to whether they can keep them away.
Right.
So what the patient has to be taught is what they are, how they operate, and what to do about them, and how to fight back. And that's what all this is about. And the first thing that has to be done before that can happen is that the psychiatric mafia has to realize that these things run very specific, repeatable, unswerving patterns, and that hallucinations do not do that.
Yeah.
Hallucinations are random. These things are not hallucinations, and they're just drugging these people senseless with their toxic drugs, and doing more damage in the long run than the voices do.
I mean, someone must know in power. I mean, when I say not an individual, but groups maybe of these entities, they must do. It can't just be us talking about it, can we? Or your work, because if you think about it, and they're not going to bring it out to the fore, are they? Because they're maybe, like the CIA might do, or our intelligence services, use it for their own ends, if you get me drift, as well.
Well, yeah, they're already doing something like that, the voice to head kind of stuff.
Yeah, the EMF stuff, the microwave technology type stuff, which is a similar process, isn't it, really?
Well, you know, I don't know.
There's
I don't know whether that voice is similar or not, because I've never talked to anybody who felt that was the case.
Right, yeah.
But it would be interesting to compare what I know clinically about what the voices say to somebody who has been a victim of MK Ultra and had that stuff put into their heads.
Yeah, that would be interesting, wouldn't it, to see what the difference would be. I'd say that one more of a MK Ultra type thing, more of a forced thing, and this would be more subtle, like you say, a lion waiting in, just implanting negative thoughts, if you like. But
I thought that it was
So-
interesting, Jerry, that when psychiatrists started, like through Freud and stuff, was that brought in to give an opposite version to the fact that people were hearing demons or another entity. So the whole system was brought in to cover it up.
He would blame them on their subconscious mind.
That's what I mean. Was it all brought in? Was all that brought in to cover up what was really happening? Is what I mean.
Well, yeah, you look at it, and the Bible has been talking about these same things.
Hundreds of years, thousands of years.
Evil spirits.
Evil spirits, yeah.
For
it's only the
thousands
last
of
200 years they've said it's not
know?
evil spirits. It's all in your imagination.
Yeah. Yeah, ever since
that's what I'm
psychiatry
trying to
came
say,
on, no, there's no such thing as science. It's all science. Just like now,
kills any spirituality at all, doesn't it? Stone dead by.
Yeah. It's all science. It's science. It got to be proved by science. Anything that they can't measure or see or hear. But look at ultraviolet light. Back nobody could see that.
Yeah.
X-rays. Nobody could see that.
1% of actual visible light there is.
What we can experience is just like you say, 1% of the entire electromagnetic spectrum.
Yeah.
And here's psychiatry going, oh yeah, we know everything. We know everything about the human mind. Yeah, we got these drugs you give them, they'll fix you. They don't fix anything.
Turn them into zombies.
They don't fix anything. They turn you into a zombie. Matter of fact, these antidepressant drugs are addicting. And what's interesting is the suicide rate of psychiatrists is virtually the same as it is for schizophrenics. I found that very interesting. Their suicide rates are almost equal. And the suicide rate of a schizophrenic is 5 times or more higher than the normal population.
Some weird karma.
Psychiatrists have a suicide rate higher than any other doctor except maybe dentists.
Yeah, dentists have high suicide rates, haven't they? I think that's something to
I'd
do with
be suicidal too if I had to look in people's mouths all day and fix cavities.
But they're putting that down to something totally different. But a lot of the mercury filling type, what they're breathing in. Anyway, we're going on another tangent there, I think. So shall we wrap it up at this point, ready to go on to something else next time, or have you got anything else you want to add to it, anybody?
Well, I could go on for
I know I could
hours
as well, but
but what we can do is next time we talk is I can get George.
That'd be fantastic.
Have to do it on a weekend. I sent you a copy of the voices he hears, a transcript, and he can. What we'll do is go into the patterns that these voices run, and you can see how similar they are to what the deep state is telling people to do right now on a macroscopic
Something I found
basis.
interesting.
Yeah. It's the same
George
process.
said when he left his house, he felt like the voices were getting quieter. I saw him in another interview, Jerry, say that. I thought that was very interesting. He said it almost sounded like coming from somewhere, and when he get into certain places, they got lower and higher in different spots.
Well, he told me the other day he was going on vacation to visit somebody, and he was out of his house, and his voices didn't come.
Right.
And I said, well, that's interesting. I wouldn't think that distance would interfere, because George has he likes getting back at them a little bit, So he knows what they are, he knows how they operate, and he likes to torque them,
poke them a bit,
But when he's doing that, he's also engaging them, so he's still operating in that same process. So I said, well, it's odd that distance would interfere with you two tormenting each other. And he wrote back a couple hours later. He said, they're here.
Right.
So, I think you'd find an interview with George interesting.
Yeah, that'd be great.
You'll hear it right from the horse's mouth, what it feels like to hear these things, what it's like to hear them, what it's like to deal with them.
Yeah.
I'd just like to say one more thing. In your book, Jerry, Sherry's checklist, there's a bit where you've got a checklist of like mantras almost that you say this, they say to keep the voices at bay. And I was reading it and I thought, everybody should read that now for what's going on now, almost like
therapeutic.
Everybody should be praying, man.
Version of what's going on now. Positive, listen to positive music. All that stuff. It's totally relevant.
They don't like that. They don't like that. Yeah, if you're Christian at all, or you have any religious inclination at all, right now you should be praying, because these things have a grip on this planet, and we're not going to break it alone.
No,
you need to be asking for help, and need to be asking for help quick from positive sources. The more of us who do that, the better the chances are that these things will be beat back. If you just go, oh yeah, we'll do whatever they say, we'll wear the masks, we'll just let everybody else handle it, they'll eventually go away. They are not going to eventually go away until they destroy us.
They will
you
never
better start praying, and you better start praying hard now.
Yeah, they will never give back what they've taken away, ever.
No. Once
Never.
they got it, you'll
End off.
never get it back.
Yeah, and they're only going to take more and more and more.
If somebody 40 years ago told me that I'd be saying this stuff I'm saying now, I'd go, get off of it. Get off.
Yeah,
what are you, crazy?
Yeah,
you got to be nuts. And it is weird stuff.
Yeah.
But it's truth. It's reality. I mean, I didn't want to face it for decades.
But it comes back to that.
I tried to blot it out. I tried to run from it. I tried to hide from it. It was like something kept throwing me back in with schizophrenics. I wanted to work with more normal people.
Yeah,
but no, I'd get assigned to more schizophrenics. It's like I couldn't escape them. It was no matter where I went, no matter which area of psychology I went, boom, back in with the schizophrenics. It's like, God, darn, let me go.
But it comes back to that point, that essence, that spark we've got inside of us. It's got to come from somewhere, and that is all we are, really. We might have this shell around us, but that soul, that spark, whatever it is, this is what these things are. Yeah, this is what these things are tuning into and trying to capture. Soul catchers, whatever you want to call it, but it's like that, isn't it?
Yep. This is not a mental illness. This is a spiritual illness. This is a spiritual crisis. Yeah. And the whole planet is in a spiritual crisis right now.
Yes, they are.
And you better start moving in the right direction before it's too late.
Yeah, a spiritual
Start
war.
asking for help. It is a spiritual war.